Hi, I'm Alice, and I'm 28 years old. I work with kids. Recently, my boyfriend Tom proposed to me, and now I'm visiting his parents for the first time. Tom went to a really good university and has a cool job. He's smart, and everyone at work likes him. I've always thought highly of him. His dad seemed happy about us getting married and even said they never had a daughter and that Tom's mom would be happy too. But when I looked at his mom, she seemed upset. She had a frown on her face, like she was mad about something. Then, out of nowhere, she asked me if it's true that I didn't finish high school. She seemed to think that because Tom is so successful, I shouldn't be good enough for him. I felt really surprised and hurt by what she said. I told her it was rude to talk to me like that, and Tom also defended me, saying that my education doesn't matter. Both Tom and his dad stood up for me against his mom. But my mother-in-law didn't seem to calm down. She kept saying that it's natural for a mom to worry about who her son is marrying, especially about their education and job. She even talked about how children inherit their mom's genes, so she wanted to make sure her future grandkids would be great too. It felt like she was really stuck on the idea that I wasn't good enough because I didn't finish high school. It's true that some people care a lot about education and parents want the best for their kids, but it made me sad to think I was being judged just because I didn't graduate. There's actually a reason for that. My dad died in a car accident when I was young, so my mom had a tough time raising me and my twin sister Emma. To help out, I started working after middle school. Now, I'm going to night school to finish my high school diploma. I'm working hard and saving money, and I might even go to college someday. Tom supports me in this, and he's even offered to help pay for my college. Tom understands where I come from, and he's really caring. That's one of the reasons I love him and want to marry him. But it seems like my mother-in-law doesn't like this idea. Tom is an only child, so we might end up living with his parents in the future. I'm a little worried about how things will go if my mother-in-law already seems so against me. A while after, I moved in with my future in-laws, just a month away from our wedding. As the big day got closer, I had to make more trips to the wedding place to double-check everything. I also had to book hotels for our out-of-town guests. With work, school, and wedding stuff, I was super busy. But my mother-in-law didn't seem happy with how I was handling everything. Today, I was getting ready to go to the venue and putting on makeup when she suddenly said, "Oh my, what are you wearing?" She saw my outfit and blurted it out. "I'm getting ready to go to the venue." "So I thought I'd dress up," I explained. I wasn't sure if she didn't like me dressing up for the venue or if she just wanted to criticize me. "Huh. You say you're going to the venue, but you're just dressing like that to attract men, aren't you? You're so careless," she accused. She just assumed I was meeting another man instead of going to the venue. I didn't know what to say. I told her I was meeting Tom at the venue and suggested she ask him if she had doubts. But she didn't listen and just kept thinking I was up to something. Then, out of nowhere, my mother-in-law messed up my carefully styled hair. "Hey, what are you doing, mother-in-law? I spent so much time getting ready. This is terrible," I exclaimed. My hair was a mess and I couldn't go out like that. But instead of apologizing, my mother-in-law said, "There's no need to fix it. This hairstyle suits a high school dropout like you. You should wear your hair like this for the wedding." I was already late, so I quickly fixed my hair and rushed to the venue where Tom was waiting. When I got there, Tom saw my upset face and asked what happened. I was torn about whether to tell Tom what happened earlier, but I didn't want to bring up something so upsetting when we were supposed to be talking about the wedding plans. So, I decided not to tell him at that moment. Then, as the wedding day got closer, my mother-in-law came up with a surprising idea. She said, "Hey, Alice's mom lives far away, right? It must be hard for her to come and stay in a hotel. Why doesn't she stay with us?" Tom and I were both surprised by her suggestion. It would save money on hotels and it could help our families bond better. Tom suggested I talk to my mom about it, so I did right away. My mom was really happy with the idea, and we decided that my twin sister Emma would come too. At first, I thought my mother-in-law was being nice, but I had no idea what she would do next. The day before the wedding, my mom and sister came to stay at my in-laws' house. Seeing them after such a long time made me really happy. My sister Emma and I are super close, so we decided to share a room for the night. Emma fell asleep quickly after having a few drinks. She's out like a light, I thought, knowing she wouldn't wake up easily. Just as I was about to go to sleep too, I heard the door to our room open. I was puzzled and then heard a buzzing noise, like someone was shading something. Now you won't be able to go to the ceremony tomorrow, will you? No need for hair for a girl who didn't finish middle school, I heard my mother-in-law say. I was shocked and turned on the lights. Mother-in-law, what are you doing? I exclaimed. The person in the bed suddenly sat up, surprising my mother-in-law too. Huh. Mother-in-law, you're Alice, right? She said, confused. She had mistaken me for Emma. That's not my hair. We're twins, and our faces really look alike, I explained. It turned out that it wasn't me whose hair got shaved, it was my sister Emma. What? How could this happen? It was supposed to be Alice, my mother-in-law exclaimed, clearly shocked. But Emma was still fast asleep, probably due to the drinks she had. When she wakes up and realizes her hair is gone, she'll be really mad. Emma's not one to hold back her feelings, so I knew she'd be furious. I can't cover for you on this, mother-in-law, I told her, feeling guilty. She probably left the room feeling uneasy. The next morning, Emma saw herself in the mirror and freaked out. She was furious about being bald. Our mom was there too and couldn't help but cry in shock. Tom was disturbed too, saying, "This is terrible. Who would do such a thing?" So, I decided to tell everyone what happened the day before. I was curious to see how my mother-in-law would react this morning, but she wasn't around. My father-in-law said she went for an early walk and hadn't come back yet. I started worrying that she might have run away, so I told her relatives everything and went to look for her. About 30 minutes later, a relative called me to say they found her at a nearby convenience store, so my father-in-law went there. My mother-in-law came back home with a bunch of excuses, unaware that she was being searched for. When she got home, she immediately said, "I didn't do anything wrong. It's all Alice's fault." Alice used the clippers on her own and shaved Emma's hair while she was sleeping next to her. I told everyone, shocked that she was trying to blame me. Don't be absurd. I didn't do anything. Weren't you the one who entered the room yesterday? It's ridiculous that you're still lying about it, I snapped, feeling frustrated by her denial. But my mother-in-law kept denying her involvement. Then my father-in-law seemed to recall something. He went outside and returned with something in his hand. "Alice, is this the clipper?" he asked, holding it out to me. When I looked at the clipper, I instantly recognized it as the one my mother-in-law used last night to shave off Emma's hair. That's it. That's the clipper. But where did you find it? I asked, feeling confused. It seems this clipper originally belonged to your father-in-law. He's always been particular about his appearance and carried grooming tools with him. When we checked his car, the compartment where he kept his grooming stuff was messed up. And the clipper was gone, my husband explained. I always keep my car keys in the bedroom. If there's brown hair in this clipper, then it's clear that your mom is the one responsible, my father-in-law added, beginning to take apart the clipper. Inside the clipper was unmistakably brown hair, which we knew belonged to Emma. She probably couldn't clean it properly because she had to rush out in the dark, my father-in-law concluded, displaying the hair to everyone. My mother-in-law sank to her knees. "Alice, it's all because of you. You tricked Tom, despite being uneducated and poor. I wanted you to leave Tom no matter what," she confessed. I felt sickened by my mother-in-law's selfish words, but the one who reacted the strongest was Emma, who had her hair shaved off. "I don't care what's happening to you," Emma said strongly. "What can we do now?" "I can't go to the wedding looking like this," she said, sounding upset. Emma's father-in-law heard her worry and called a friend who knew how to fix hair. They decided to bring a wig quickly. It would help Emma's hair look better for now. But they needed to find a solution for her mother-in-law too. 30 minutes later, the friend of Emma's father-in-law came with the wig, and Emma looked beautiful with her new hair. At first, they thought about cutting the mother-in-law's hair like they did with Emma, but they didn't feel right about it. Instead, they decided to reveal the mother-in-law's bad actions to everyone. At the wedding, there were some landlords who had been helping the mother-in-law's family for a long time. They were close to Emma's father-in-law, and hearing about what happened would surely affect the mother-in-law's parents. The landlords had been giving them a discount on their rent, but they might stop helping them once they found out about the mother-in-law's behavior. They might even make things worse by increasing the rent or making them leave the apartment. The mother-in-law's parents were poor and depended on this help. If they were forced to leave their apartment, they would have to stay with the mother-in-law. But from what Tom had said before, it seemed like the mother-in-law didn't get along with her parents and wouldn't want to take care of them. Living with her parents would be very difficult for the mother-in-law. "Please wait, I'll be in big trouble if you do that. I'm really sorry, it was my fault. I got carried away and did something wrong. I'm sorry, Emma. I'll compensate you for the damage, so please forgive me." The mother-in-law kept apologizing over and over again, bowing down on the floor. But even with all the apologies, Emma's hair couldn't be fixed. After talking it over, they decided that Emma's father-in-law and Tom would tell everyone about what the mother-in-law did. Emma had already agreed to this. The mother-in-law said she didn't want to go to the wedding and tried to escape, but Emma and Tom stopped her. When they got to the wedding place, relatives who had heard of the situation through messages looked very worried as they approached us. We showed everyone what the mother-in-law did wrong, and Emma bravely took off her wig, revealing her bald head. Everyone was shocked, especially the women, who couldn't believe it. For a woman, her hair is very important, so imagine the shock of suddenly having it shaved off. Seeing Emma like this made some people cry. Then, as expected, the landlord came to the mother-in-law and asked if it was true. At first, she tried to lie, but Emma's father-in-law encouraged her to tell the truth, and she finally admitted it. The landlord was furious and also scolded the mother-in-law. After that, the mother-in-law looked sad during the rest of the ceremony, which was unusual for her. The wedding went well, and we were happy to have the blessings of many people. But we couldn't stay in the same house with the mother-in-law anymore. So we decided to move to our own apartment and start a new life as a couple. The mother-in-law panicked when she realized we were leaving the house. She cried and begged us not to go, but we couldn't stay with her anymore. Even the father-in-law felt the same way. He told her he wanted a divorce and asked her to leave the house. The mother-in-law looked scared and held onto the father-in-law, pleading with him to reconsider. She said she had nowhere else to go because she didn't get along with her own parents. She was trembling and looked like she might collapse at any moment. But I didn't feel sorry for her, considering what she did to Emma. I never expected someone to shave my head while I was sleeping, mistaking me for Emma. The mother-in-law kept trying to convince us to let her stay, but the father-in-law contacted her parents, and eventually she had to leave the house. Now, she's living with her parents, even though they have a difficult personality, and she's struggling to take care of them all by herself. The mother-in-law kept calling us, wanting to start over, but we didn't want to live with her again, so we blocked her calls. Now, we're living happily with the father-in-law in his old house. We decided to renovate it together. The father-in-law built his dream study, Tom set up a display area for his model figures, and I installed a modern kitchen. We also made a room for the child we plan to have in the future. Now, the three of us are living comfortably. Emma's hair, which was shaved off before, has grown back short and looks great. Her friends love her new look. She jokes about what happened, which sometimes makes me feel conflicted. Emma visits us for sleepovers sometimes, and I always look forward to that. Even though there might be challenges ahead, I believe we can overcome them together.
A few days after the wedding, I was at home when the doorbell rang. I checked the monitor, and there was Betty, my son Joseph's wife, standing alone. "I'm here to talk to you, Sandra. Please open the door." I opened the door and let Betty into the house. What could she possibly want? She came to my house without Joseph and without any notice. "Joseph told me that you and your husband are divorced, right?" she asked out of nowhere. I could sense she had an agenda, but I calmly replied, "Yes, that's right. It was when Joseph was still very young. But why does that matter?" "Oh? Well, since you're single, I didn't expect much about inheritance. But as your daughter-in-law, I thought it was wise to check on the assets." Now I understood why Betty came over without Joseph. This daughter-in-law of mine came to see how much savings I had. When Betty realized she wouldn't get any money out of me, she said, "Actually, I came here today because I have a favor to ask you, Sandra." "A favor?" I asked, and Betty nodded, smiling. I had a terrible feeling about this. "Well, I'd like to sever ties with you since we're practically strangers now," Betty blurted out. "Strangers?" "Yes, exactly. So, from now on, please stay out of our lives." I absolutely don't want to be responsible for taking care of you. Let's sever ties completely." Betty said this with a cheerful laugh, leaving me utterly speechless. Seeing that I couldn't say anything, Betty stood up, seemingly satisfied. Then she said, "So, Joseph and I won't be in touch with you anymore, Sandra. And please don't contact us either. I'm leaving now." With that, she walked out of the house. My name is Sandra. I'm in my 60s, living alone in a rural town, relying on my pension. In my younger days, I was a real workaholic, so I managed to save quite a bit of money. I grew up in a poor family, so I started working right after high school. I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to start earning money as soon as possible. I met my husband, Charles, at the company where we both worked. Charles was about the same age as me, and we bonded over shared interests, eventually starting a relationship. When I first met Charles, he had dreams of starting his own business. "I've been saving up money because I want to make my dream come true." "That's an amazing dream. I'll help you," I said, and Charles smiled happily. Then he said, "How about we get married when I achieve my dream of starting a business?" Charles held my hand and promised me that. To support Charles, I worked as hard as I could. Thanks to that, a year after making that promise, Charles successfully started his business. And as promised, we really did get married. Soon after, our son Joseph was born, and we became a family of 3. Our life wasn't very stable, but we enjoyed small moments of happiness and lived a joyful life. However, that happiness didn't last long. I discovered that Charles, whom I had trusted, was having an affair. We had many discussions as a couple, but Charles chose his mistress, and we ended up getting a divorce. It was a shock to end up like this, but I couldn't afford to be down. I had Joseph, so I couldn't just stop moving forward. I worked as hard as I could while raising Joseph on my own, managing to get by somehow. We never lived a wealthy life, but things were more stable than when Charles had just started his business. It was easier to save money too. After that, Joseph grew up well, studied diligently, and got into college. I covered all of Joseph's college expenses. I wanted him to go through college without any worries. The savings I had built up for Joseph's future finally came in handy. As a parent, there's no greater joy. "Thanks, Mom. I'll work hard so I can repay you someday," Joseph said to me, with tears in his eyes. There's no need for repayment. Just seeing him live healthily and happily is all I need to be content. Joseph graduated from college and got a job at a prestigious company in the city. When Joseph became independent, I decided to sell the house and move into an apartment by myself. There was no longer a home for Joseph to return to, but actually, the move was Joseph's idea. "Mom, I think it's time for you to start living your own life." "My own life?" "Yes. I'll be living on my own, and you should do whatever makes you happy. Like selling this big house and moving somewhere new." Joseph was right. This house had originally been mine after the divorce from Charles. We didn't have much money back then, but we managed to buy this house at a bargain. The old house was falling apart in places, and I had started to feel that living there was becoming impossible. But Joseph's words opened my eyes to new possibilities. "Moving, huh? I hadn't even thought about that." "There are apartments for single people these days, you know. I think you'd be more comfortable living like that, Mom." Joseph's words made even more sense to me. So, I decided to move into an apartment. Since I had reached the age where I could receive my pension, I shifted to a lifestyle where I worked fewer hours while collecting my pension. I never thought that at this age, I would be living a completely different life. I was quite excited about imagining what my new life would be like. living alone in an apartment turned out to be very fulfilling. However, spending more time at home didn't feel entirely comfortable. As a workaholic and someone who grew up poor, I wasn't used to this slow-paced lifestyle. One day, while living this way, Joseph came to visit me at my apartment. "Mom, it's been a while." Joseph looked slightly more mature than the last time I saw him, but that gentle smile hadn't changed. Seeing him like that reassured me. It seemed like he was enjoying his life, even after starting to live alone. "It's been a while. But why the sudden visit?" "Well, there's something I want to talk to you about," Joseph said, looking a little shy. I was curious but invited him in, saying, "Come on in." "Actually, I'm thinking of getting married." "Married?" Joseph's unexpected words made me ask again, unable to believe it. The idea that Joseph, of all people, was talking about marriage was surprising, to say the least. I had never once heard him talk about any relationships with women. "Who is she?" "She's a senior at my company. Her name is Betty." "She's older than you?" I responded, and Joseph blushed. Joseph had always had a thing for older women since he was young. It seemed that even as an adult, his taste hadn't changed. "I just proposed to her recently, and she said yes. So now we're talking about submitting the marriage certificate and having a wedding." "I see. Well, congratulations." I was so surprised that I almost forgot to say it, but I quickly offered Joseph my congratulations. Hearing that made Joseph look very happy. As I listened to him talk more, it seemed that his fiancée, Betty, had a bit of a strong personality. Joseph, who had always been the quiet type, seemed to be guided by her. No matter who she was, if Joseph chose her, I was ready to accept her. "We couldn't bring her today, but Betty wants to meet you, so we'll come by another time." "Got it. I'm looking forward to it." "But, Joseph." "What is it?" I gently reminded Joseph. "Next time, let me know ahead of time when you're coming. I might not always be home." Joseph looked like he had completely forgotten, with a sheepish expression. He must have been eager to tell me the news and came over right away. He could have just called, but he went out of his way to come and see me in person. I'm deeply grateful to Joseph for always thinking about me. The next time I heard from Joseph was a week later. On the day he said he'd bring Betty, I woke up early in the morning, nervous and waiting for Joseph. Betty seemed to be strong-willed, but I couldn't gauge how much. Since I only knew what Joseph told me, I couldn't make any judgments. Honestly, I was a bit anxious. While I was thinking about that, the doorbell rang. I checked the monitor, saw Joseph, and headed for the door. "Welcome." I greeted them, and there stood Joseph with a woman. "Mom, this is Betty, the one I've been seeing." "Betty, this is my mom." Joseph introduced us to each other, and I smiled at Betty standing before me. "Nice to meet you, Betty. Thanks for coming all this way." I greeted her, but Betty just stared at me without a smile. It felt like I was being observed, almost like an examination. Her demeanor was far from what you'd expect from someone coming to meet a family member for the first time. At that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. After what felt like a long pause, Betty finally said, "Nice to meet you, I'm Betty," in a tone that sounded more like an obligation than a greeting. As much as I hate to admit it, while Betty was scrutinizing me, I was also taking in her appearance. Her features were sharp, her makeup was heavy. Her clothes were flashy. It was clear from the brand of her bag that it was expensive. Of course, I couldn't judge her character based on these observations, but I couldn't help noticing. I invited the two of them inside, and we sat down to talk. The first topic of conversation was the wedding. As soon as the wedding was mentioned, Betty's eyes widened, and she leaned forward. "The wedding has been my dream since I was little." "Oh, really?" "That's why I refuse to compromise. I'm going to push through all of my wishes, so make sure you're prepared for that, Joseph's mom." Betty directed this comment straight at me. "Well, good luck with that," I responded, a bit taken aback. Why was Betty telling me this? It made sense if she was declaring this to Joseph, her soon-to-be husband, but why was she telling me? I looked at Joseph, a little worried about the future, but he seemed unbothered, smiling at Betty. That made me even more concerned. After discussing future plans, Joseph and Betty left. I was deeply relieved that it was finally over. Still, Betty seemed like quite a handful. Her intense focus on the wedding was one thing, but her indifference to any other topic was also troubling. Should I just stand by and watch these two? These thoughts crossed my mind as I observed the interactions between Joseph and Betty that day. But Joseph was an adult now, and there wasn't much I could do for him. So, I decided not to intervene any further. That should have been the end of it, but a few days later, Joseph came by again. This time, however, he looked deeply troubled. "What happened?" "After we met, Betty and I went to a wedding planning meeting a few days later. But the costs were much higher than I expected," Joseph said, looking downcast. He explained that he and Betty had been making steady progress in their wedding preparations. But during the meeting, Joseph was shocked by the total cost. I thought, of course. It was clear from Betty's previous talk that it was going to be an extravagant wedding. When they came to visit me, she had already mentioned wanting to have the ceremony at a certain theme park, so naturally, it was going to be more expensive than usual. "Costs are unavoidable." "I know, but I already decided that I would pay for everything, and now I can't back out," Joseph replied, his voice filled with resignation. It seemed that Joseph intended to cover the entire cost of the wedding himself. Despite it being Betty's dream wedding, she wasn't contributing any money? I couldn't help but feel uneasy and suspicious about that, but Joseph said, "But Betty wants her dream wedding. I really want to make that happen for her," making it clear that he wanted to prioritize Betty's wishes. "But do you even have that kind of money? If you did, that's fine, but the fact that you came here means you don't, right? If I don't have enough, I'll consider taking out a loan. That's why I wanted to tell you about this first, Mom." Joseph answered my question, looking very serious. He was clearly not joking. The fact that he wasn't asking for money was likely because he assumed a single mom like me wouldn't have much. I took an envelope out of a drawer and handed it to Joseph. "Here, use this." "Huh? What's this?" "I was planning to give this to you when you became independent. There's about $40,000 in it." When I said that, Joseph's eyes widened in surprise. In truth, I had been saving money for Joseph's future. I never imagined it would come in handy this soon, especially not for the wedding. "That should be enough, right?" I asked, and Joseph's eyes lit up. "Mom, thank you so much," he said, tears of joy streaming down his face. I was slightly exasperated by his reaction, but at the same time, I couldn't help but find it endearing. Joseph is truly a kind soul. Even now, as an adult, he still puts others' needs before his own. For someone like Joseph, I didn't mind giving up $40,000, even if it was for something as extravagant as his fiancée's dream wedding. I decided to keep it a secret that I had covered the entire wedding cost. There was no need for Betty to know. After that, Joseph and Betty went ahead with their wedding at the theme park as planned. When I arrived at the venue on the day of the wedding, I was stunned by how extravagant it was. At that point, I understood why it was so expensive. Betty was in high spirits the whole time, and Joseph looked genuinely happy watching her. If that money helped make their day special, then it was worth it. And so, the beautiful wedding went off without a hitch. A few days after the wedding, I was at home when the doorbell rang. I checked the monitor, and there was Betty, Joseph's wife, standing alone. "Betty? What brings you here?" I called out, and Betty smiled, saying, "I'm here to talk to you, Sandra. Please let me in." "Sure, come in." I opened the door and let Betty into the house. What could she possibly want? She came to my house without Joseph and without any notice. I motioned for Betty to take a seat. Betty started looking around the house again. I braced myself, wondering what she was about to say, when she narrowed her eyes and looked at me. Then she asked, "Joseph told me that you're divorced from your husband, right, Sandra?" The unexpected question made me pause as I was preparing tea. But I smiled gently, not wanting to show any unease, and replied, "Yes, that was when Joseph was very young." "What happened to the alimony from that time? Do you still have it?" "I used it for Joseph's education and other things." "But why do you ask?" I shot back, still smiling, at Betty, who was boldly asking such direct questions. I was slightly shaken, but my irritation toward Betty far outweighed that. Betty, unfazed by my silent resistance, calmly responded, "Oh? Since you're single, I wasn't expecting much. But as your daughter-in-law, I thought it would be wise to check on the assets." I see now. I finally understood why Betty had come to my house without Joseph. This daughter-in-law of mine wanted to find out how much I had in savings. Even Joseph, my own son, didn't know about my savings. That was the rule I had set when I decided to give him that $40,000. If they knew about the money, they might start relying on me, and I couldn't have that. This savings was money I had put aside for myself, and I had no intention of giving it to Joseph or anyone else. Betty, sensing that she wouldn't be able to get any money from me, remarked, "I guess living on just a pension and part-time wages leads to a rather modest lifestyle." That's all I needed to know. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to adjust. It seemed I had successfully kept the truth hidden. As I kept smiling, Betty's gaze became even sharper as she looked at me. "Actually, I came here today because I have a favor to ask you, Sandra." "A favor?" I asked, and Betty nodded, smiling. I had a really bad feeling about this. "I'm now part of Joseph's family. Which means that Joseph and I are a separate family from you, Sandra, right?" "What are you trying to say?" "Well, I'd like to sever ties with you since we're practically strangers now," Betty declared. "Strangers? That's right, isn't it? So from now on, I want you to stay out of our lives. I absolutely don't want to be responsible for your care, so let's just cut ties completely." Betty said this with a cheerful smile, leaving me in shock. She showed up at my house unannounced, pried into my finances and alimony, and now that she knew she wouldn't be getting anything, she wanted to cut ties. This was pure madness. Is this how a daughter-in-law treats her mother-in-law? I couldn't find any words to respond, and Betty, satisfied, stood up. Then she said, "So, Joseph and I will never contact you again, and you should do the same. I'm leaving now." With that, she left the house immediately. I was too stunned to say anything back to the whirlwind Betty. For a while, I was in shock, but then I quickly came to my senses and called Joseph. There's no way the kind-hearted Joseph would agree to cut ties with me as Betty had said. Thinking this must be some kind of mistake, I gripped my phone tightly with trembling hands. Fortunately, Joseph answered right away. "Joseph! Betty just came over and said she wants to cut ties with me. Do you really intend to do that too?" I asked frantically, and Joseph responded as if he was just remembering. "Well, Betty wants that, so I'm going along with it. If Betty doesn't want to have anything to do with you, I think it's best to respect her wishes." She declared this bluntly. The moment I heard it, my mind went completely blank. Unbelievable. Was Joseph really willing to obey Betty's every word, even when it came to such an important matter as our family ties? I was utterly disappointed in Joseph. The kind and considerate Joseph I thought I knew was nothing but an illusion. "I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, Mom. But from now on, I think it's best that we live our lives without relying on each other." Not relying on each other is different from cutting ties. But you see, Betty doesn't want any connection with you, and if that's the case, I think it's unavoidable. I was stunned. At the same time, I felt a strong sense of shock and almost wanted to blurt out everything Betty had said. But I swallowed my words and calmly replied, "Fine. Then you should no longer rely on me either. Consider the money I spent on your wedding as a severance payment. From now on, I won't be offering any more support." I calmly responded. Joseph responded with, "I understand." His reaction made it seem like he didn't fully grasp the gravity of cutting ties with his own mother. After hearing Joseph's response, I ended the call. Once I hung up, I couldn't move for a while. I felt a deep sense of regret toward Joseph, who didn't acknowledge the $40,000 I had spent on his wedding. There was also resentment toward Betty, who had caused the rift between us. But above all, I was devastated by how our mother-son bond had been severed in such a manner. A few hours later, I called my friend Nancy and headed out to a pub to drink. Nancy is my best friend from our school days. We know everything about each other, including Joseph. "Wow, it sounds like Joseph is completely under his wife's control." That's exactly what I thought. I was venting to Nancy about what had happened today. Nancy listened patiently, as she always does. I tried to act like it didn't bother me, but honestly, I'm really hurt. Betty asked me so many questions about money, and now it feels like Joseph only approached me about the wedding costs because they were after my money. It does seem like they were testing you, hoping you'd offer to cover the costs. Maybe they thought if they mentioned taking out a loan, you'd step in to help. Hearing Nancy say that made me feel even more deflated. I had given $40,000 to my son and his wife, who turned out to be manipulative and selfish. I couldn't help but feel that I had been naive, that I had misjudged them completely. What will become of me now? I was filled with a vague sense of anxiety about the future. So, why not use the money you've saved to do something you love? Do something I love? Nancy's unexpected suggestion made me look up in surprise. She smiled. Why not go somewhere without Joseph and his wife? Like, move abroad. As she said this, she pulled out something to show me. It was a plane ticket. The destination was the capital, Kuala Lumpur. Malaysia? Yes. I was actually going to invite you on this trip. How about it? Why don't we take a vacation and explore before deciding if we want to move there? Nancy smiled warmly. Whenever I was going through tough times, Nancy was always there to support me. Nancy lost her husband a few years ago and has been living alone ever since. She's full of energy and seems to thoroughly enjoy her single life. To clear my mind, I decided to join Nancy on a trip to Malaysia. I boarded a plane, something I hadn't done in years, and headed to Malaysia. The experience of flying again after so long made me incredibly nervous. Everything in Malaysia felt new and refreshing. We visited the Petronas Twin Towers, which I had only ever seen in pictures, and toured various other attractions. Both Nancy and I could speak a little Malay due to work, so we didn't struggle with the language barrier at all. We were able to enjoy the trip without any issues. It was genuinely fun.
You know, I've always planned on moving abroad.
One night, back at our accommodation, Nancy said this while gazing at the night sky.
I always wanted to invite you too, Sandra, but I held back because you had Joseph. But the truth is, I've always wanted to live here with you. Really? With me?
I was surprised by Nancy's unexpected confession. She had always needed me. Thinking about that warmed my heart. Nancy smiled gently at me and asked, "What do you think, Sandra? Didn't you feel like you might want to live here?" As she asked me this, I seriously considered Nancy's words. Malaysia is far cheaper than the US. With my savings and pension, I could live comfortably here. Language wouldn't be an issue either, given our current skills. And living with Nancy would certainly be exciting and fun. Rather than feeling anxious, I started to look forward to what the future might hold.
I think I'd like that. Living here with you sounds like it would be a lot of fun.
When I said that, Nancy's face lit up with a joyful smile. It was time to forget about Joseph. From now on, I wasn't his mother anymore, and I didn't need to worry about him or Betty. I could finally spend my time on myself, doing what made me happy. After returning to the US, Nancy and I began the process of planning our move. After various preparations and some hassle, Nancy and I were finally able to make it to Malaysia together. Once we were there, I realized that living in a place is quite different from just visiting as a tourist. However, I was having a great time with Nancy every day. Before I knew it, a year had passed since we moved to Malaysia. I had grown accustomed to my new life and was thoroughly enjoying my days. One day, I received a call on my smartphone. The caller ID showed that it was coming from the US. When I checked the number closely, I saw it was from Joseph, the son with whom I had cut ties. At first, I ignored the calls, wondering what he could possibly want now, but Joseph kept calling persistently. Feeling conflicted, I decided to consult with Nancy, and eventually, I reluctantly decided to answer the phone just once.
Mom, it's been a while. It's me.
As soon as I picked up, I heard Joseph's cheerful voice. Joseph's voice hasn't changed a bit, even after all this time. But that didn't erase the feelings I had from our last encounter.
Who is this? What? What are you talking about? It's your son, Mom.
Joseph responded happily, but his cheerfulness only made me more wary. Joseph and I had severed ties. I never thought we would be in contact again. So why was he calling me now? I took a deep breath and regained my composure. Then I said, "I was disowned, remember? I don't have a son anymore." "I know, and I'm really sorry about that. I'm asking for your forgiveness." Joseph's tone was light, almost as if he hadn't heard a word I said. I had no intention of ever forgiving Joseph, but I figured I might as well hear him out. "So, what do you want?"
Actually, we had a baby.
Joseph's voice was full of joy. At that moment, I motioned for Nancy to come over and switched the phone to speaker mode so she could listen in.
A baby? You're a grandmother now, Mom. We want you to come visit.
Is that so?
Betty's here with me right now. She wants you to come visit us too. I'll hand the phone over to her now.
Joseph handed the phone to Betty, and I heard her irritating, obnoxious voice say, "Sandra, it's been a while." I sighed and decided not to respond to Betty. Nancy, standing beside me, was shaking with laughter at my obvious reaction. "Sandra, it's your grandchild. You should bring a gift and come see us. We went to your house, but we were surprised to find out you had moved." As soon as I heard Betty's words, my suspicions were confirmed. It seemed that Joseph and Betty, now with a baby, were in need of money. Desperate, they had decided to turn to me, thinking I might still have some. They probably thought that telling me I had a grandchild would make me happy and willing to help. From what Betty said, it was clear they hadn't yet realized that I had moved abroad.
That's right. Mom, where are you living now? I'm not telling you. And besides, I don't have a son anymore, so that child isn't my grandchild.
My response clearly took them by surprise. And after a brief silence, Joseph spoke up.
Come on, are you still holding on to that? I said I was sorry.
Yeah, Sandra, don't be stubborn. Just come visit us, Betty added, sounding flustered. I exchanged a glance with Nancy and said,
If you can pay back the $40,000 I gave you for the wedding, I might consider forgiving you. $40,000 for the wedding? Don't be ridiculous. That was money Joseph spent on me. Oh? So, Joseph didn't tell you that he had no money and asked me for help? I told him that the $40,000 was my way of cutting ties.
I could hear Joseph and Betty arguing on the other end of the line.
Wait, what is this about?
No, it's not like that. Nancy, trying to keep quiet, was laughing uncontrollably at the situation. Seeing her like that made me start to find it amusing too.
Aren't you too ashamed? I'm embarrassed to even think of you as my family.
Hearing this, they both quickly focused back on me.
Sandra, please wait. We're really grateful for what you did for the wedding. Let's just forget the past and get along. I want to see you, Mom. And anyway, that $40,000 was saved for me, wasn't it? So, I don't think we need to pay it back.
Desperate as they were, they started saying whatever came to mind, completely disregarding any sense of decency. Hearing this, I was beyond exasperated.
That's all in the past. If you hadn't cast me aside back then, you might still be benefiting from my support today.
Joseph, trying to mend things, responded.
But we can still make amends and get along, starting now.
Joseph was clearly trying to get me to forgive him. I could hear Betty in the background, adding her own comments to support him. I sighed in exasperation and said,
We're never going to see each other again. I'll never tell you where I am, and no matter how much you search, you won't find me. This is really the end. Goodbye.
Ignoring their frantic shouts, I hung up the phone.
They're so clueless.
Honestly, it's ridiculous. We looked at each other and laughed, then continued drinking. To make sure my phone wouldn't ring again, I turned it off. Later, following Nancy's suggestion, I decided to change my phone number. I was never good with technology, so I didn't know much about blocking calls or rejecting them. To make sure they couldn't contact me anymore, I decided to change my number completely. Before I did, I received one last call from a relative who told me that Joseph and Betty had been asking to borrow money. Apparently, Betty had been very reckless with her spending and had taken out loans from various companies. When I heard the full story, I learned that Betty had already been in debt by tens of thousands of dollars even before they got married. Those expensive designer bags, the long manicured nails, it all came from borrowed money. Honestly, I wasn't surprised. Knowing Betty, she was just putting on airs. Their fights over this eventually led to Joseph selling Betty's belongings to pay off some of the debt. But, of course, that didn't solve everything, and this led to a growing rift between them, which eventually ended in divorce. Betty got custody of their child and returned to her parents' home, but her sensible parents were furious when they heard what had happened. They took care of the child because they didn't want the grandchild to suffer, but they left Betty to fend for herself. Feeling abandoned, Betty started frequenting male strip clubs, sinking further into debt. While her parents took care of the child, Betty's life spiraled out of control. The thought of how her life would likely continue to deteriorate brought a wry smile to my face. Joseph didn't fare much better. In addition to paying child support, he was burdened with the embarrassment of having thrown a lavish wedding that everyone knew about, which made it impossible for him to admit the divorce. Instead, he kept up the facade of a happy marriage, but little by little, the truth came out, and his friends started distancing themselves from him. Now, Joseph's only companions are the women at hostess bars. With Betty addicted to male strip clubs and Joseph stuck in his own lonely spiral, it seemed the two of them were destined to follow similar, tragic paths. When I explained the situation and my decision to cut ties with Joseph to my relatives, they understood completely. No one would be reaching out to help them now. Joseph used to be a good, honest boy. But it seems being with Betty had completely changed him. That said, none of it mattered to me anymore. I had resolved to live my life free from the past. Now, I've started making jewelry with Nancy. It's just a hobby at the moment, but maybe one day we'll sell them. My second life has only just begun.
Enough of this racket! Get out of here with that baby, right now!
In the middle of the night, my husband was fed up with our baby's crying. He shouted angrily, and just like that, he drove me and our 3-month-old daughter out of our home. With the change of seasons, the mornings and evenings were beginning to get chilly, and it looked like it was going to rain any minute.
I'm freezing! If we stay out here, we'll freeze to death.
Without a wallet or a coat, I began to shiver as the cold seeped into my bones.
Please, let us in!
Despite my constant knocking, there was no response from inside. Helpless, I wrapped my crying child tightly in her blanket to keep her warm, and we continued to walk.
I must protect my baby, at least.
Wandering aimlessly in the night, I was exhausted and found myself sitting on a bench in the park, frozen to the core. As I gazed up at the sky, the events that led us here played back in my mind.
How did we end up in this situation?
Tears that I could no longer hold back streamed down my cheeks. My name is Olivia, and I am 31 years old. My parents divorced when I was in middle school, and my mother single-handedly sent me to college. 2 years ago, while crossing a pedestrian lane, she was hit by a car and passed away. In exchange for a huge accident compensation, I lost my only family member, leaving me in a state of despair. During this time, Benjamin, who was my college classmate and now my husband, was there to support me.
Olivia, you can always lean on me when times are tough.
His kind words comforted my aching heart, and we started dating. A year later, he proposed, and we got married. I was grateful that we were blessed with a child so soon, and I thought we could build a happy family.
I'm pregnant. We're already 3 months along. What? Are you serious?
I thought he would be thrilled, but since he learned about the pregnancy, my husband strangely became distant. Not only that, his attitude became increasingly cold.
What is this dinner? Isn't this just fast food?
I'm sorry. Morning sickness hit me hard. I couldn't cook.
If you can't even manage now, I worry about the future. Useless.
The only thing I could do was watch my husband's back as he stormed off after his harsh words. Even when my belly became heavy and bending down became a challenge, he wouldn't lend a hand. Still, I believed that once our baby was born, he would return to his kinder self. After the birth, he visited the hospital right away, but after that he never showed his face, claiming he was busy with work. When I was discharged, I had to take our daughter home alone. And that's when the real nightmare started. When my daughter and I got home, my husband began yelling loudly every night.
The baby's crying is too noisy. I have work tomorrow. How am I supposed to sleep?
I understand where my hardworking husband, who supports us, is coming from, but I can't seem to soothe our crying daughter. If only my mom was here. With each passing day, I felt a deepening rift between my husband and me, plagued by a sense of loneliness. Even though our daughter is very quiet during the day, when night falls, it's as if she senses her father's tense and angry mood and starts to cry. I don't know what to do anymore. This life is the polar opposite of the warm and happy family I envisioned. My husband leaves all childcare responsibilities to me, claiming he's busy with work. On his days off, he'd say he can't relax at home and would go out. Running around all day taking care of a baby left me exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and our daughter's night crying seemed to get worse each day as if she could sense my distress. One night, my husband's anger reached its peak.
Get out of this house with that baby right now.
I can't do that. Before I could finish my sentence, my daughter and I were thrown out into the cold night. Without keys, a wallet, or a cell phone, I couldn't go back home and was left feeling helpless. I wrapped my daughter tightly in a blanket to keep her warm, held her close, and just kept walking until I sat down on a bench, cursing my life. We were supposed to be happy, how did it come to this? As if expressing my inner turmoil, my daughter started crying again, but I was too worn out to move. Just as I was starting to feel faint from the cold, an older woman's voice called out, "Are you okay, Mom?" For a moment, I thought my deceased mother had come from the afterlife. I lifted my face to see a stranger looking worried.
What are you doing in such a cold place?
My husband kicked me out because of our baby's crying. Did you two have a fight? You'll catch a cold here, come stay at my place. But, as I hesitated, not sure if I should impose on a stranger, she took my daughter from me, started soothing her, and my daughter suddenly became cheerful. It's okay, don't worry. Let's go somewhere warm for the baby's sake. Upon entering the house, my daughter was gently wrapped in a soft blanket to ward off the chill. Drink this to warm up. She even offered a warm glass of hot milk. My daughter, nestled in her arms, started to sleep peacefully, her gentle snores echoing in the quiet room. I can't believe it. No matter how much I tried, she just wouldn't calm down.
It can be quite tough if you're not used to it. I recently became a grandmother and I've been taking care of the little one occasionally. Maybe that's why I've become so sensitive to a baby's cries. I'm glad I decided to check on the noise.
Looking closely at the woman, her gentle smile tugging at the corners of her eyes, she was around the same age as my mother. The warmth of her atmosphere allowed me to feel at ease for the first time in a while. I'm sorry for intruding like this. It's okay. We should help each other out in times of need. Do you need me to take you home? Do you live close by? No, I might just get thrown out again. Seeing me stumble over my words, she kindly offered me to stay until morning. Her kindness moved me to tears again.
Thank you so much. My name is Olivia.
Wait a minute, isn't your baby's name in? Yes, but how did you? Turns out, this woman was Jackson, my husband's direct superior. She had sent us a gift when our daughter was born, so she remembered Anne's name. I was surprised at the coincidence and regretted complaining about my husband to her.
We're always grateful for your help. The thing is, my husband has been busy with work lately and he seems quite tired.
That can't be right. Your husband has been on parental leave for the past 2 months.
What? But he says he goes to work every day. He even said he has work tomorrow.
Tomorrow is a holiday, the office will be closed. I wonder what he's up to. I had no idea that my husband, who I thought was always working, was actually on vacation. However, I did notice a sense of excitement on the days he was supposed to be at work. Ever since I got pregnant, my husband's behavior has changed, and I've been feeling something off recently. As I wondered how to investigate my husband's actions, Jackson suggested an idea.
Why don't you check his social media? You can use this computer.
She pointed to a computer in the corner of the room and turned it on. I gratefully accepted her offer and started scanning my husband's social media. To my shock, I found a pile of photos of him and another woman. He must have thought I was too preoccupied with parenting and housework to ever notice. They look like a couple, don't they?
That's Ava. She worked at our company for only 3 months and recently quit.
No way. Although I had a hunch, I was too overwhelmed with my first experience of motherhood to consider it seriously. However, realizing he was truly having an affair was more shocking than I had anticipated.
Do you know her address? Her contact information?
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have mentioned her name. It's personal information and I can't disclose it.
Oh, right.
As I deflated, Jackson comforted me.
I'll do everything I can to help with anything else.
Hey, isn't this the Paris Hotel? I know it's a fancy place, and you've been here several times. Do you have that much money? True enough, there were numerous photos on social media of my husband and his mistress, the woman, indulging in luxury dining at the renowned Paris Hotel. As I was on maternity leave, there was no income, and my husband hadn't saved any money since we got married. There's no way he could have such disposable cash. No way, this can't be happening. With a prayerful heart, I checked my bank balance online and found that my savings of $250,000, which I received when my mother died in a car accident, had been halved. I was so shocked that I was unable to move for a while.
What's wrong?
My husband has been using my savings without my permission. I hadn't touched it at all because I was planning to use it for our daughter. Looking back, I had left my debit card in the card case with my husband when I was hospitalized for childbirth. Since that day, he hadn't visited me in the hospital even once. And the first time he withdrew from my savings was the day I handed him the debit card. I, who trusted my husband, thought he had locked it in a safe and didn't doubt him.
I can't forgive him. He's been using my beloved mother's inheritance without my permission. We must punish the lying cheater. And the best way to do that is to secure evidence.
With a smirk on his face, Jackson handed me a digital camera. The next day, as we watched from the car Jackson was driving near our house, my husband, humming a tune, hopped into his car and drove off.
He doesn't even worry about our daughter and me. Instead, he's making a fool of himself by being so excited.
As expected, my husband's car arrived at the Paris Hotel. After a while, the mistress came and they casually linked arms and entered the hotel restaurant as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I asked Jackson to look after our daughter and sat quietly in a seat behind them.
I've had enough of Olivia's stubbornness. Finally, I kicked her out last night. Now if she files for divorce, I'll get the compensation she received from her mother's car accident. If things go well, I might even get the alimony from the divorce trial.
Hee hee hee.
You're a bad man. Your wife doesn't even realize that you're after her money. Since her mother passed away, I've been very kind to her so that she'll never find out. But having a child was an unexpected obstacle.
Listening to my husband's unbelievable words, my head went blank from the shock. Unaware of my feelings, my husband, swinging the key to the hotel room, heads for the elevator with the woman. When I secretly followed them, even though it was just a brief moment before the elevator arrived, the two of them began to hug and even start kissing. Even though I was prepared, seeing the affair in action was painful. A chill ran down my spine at my husband's voice, saying,
"This is a pre-celebration for kicking Olivia out. Let's have a blast today."
Unable to speak up, the two of them were swallowed up by the elevator. Left behind, I was so frustrated that I couldn't say anything, and I was overwhelmed with sadness and despair. I couldn't stand and fell to my knees right there. At that moment, the sadness that dominated my heart began to turn into a desire for revenge.
It's too cruel to betray me like this. I can't just let this go.
That evening, timing my return for when my husband got home from work, I made my way back to the house.
Well, look who's back.
I'm sorry. I'll do whatever you say from now on. Please, let me back in the house. To tighten the noose around him, I decided to play the part of the obedient wife for a little while, quelling my rising anger.
Fine, from now on I'm not giving you any living expenses. Do whatever you want.
Understood. Without uttering a single word of disagreement, and not mentioning divorce, I was clearly annoying my husband. Despite his continued horrible attitude, I kept tolerating it. And while my husband pretended to be at work but was meeting his mistress, I was searching the house for evidence of his affair. I found several receipts for hotels and meals in his bag and suit pockets, but that alone seemed like weak evidence. So I traced his social media under the woman's name, and her identity was finally revealed. 2 weeks later, all the preparations were ready, and I once again visited the notorious Paris hotel. The two of them were nonchalantly having dinner and getting cozy in public as they did before. I approached them as they were about to get on the elevator. "What are you doing here?"
Why are you here? I'm obviously here for a work meeting.
Quickly shaking off the arm entwined with his mistress, my husband, looking guilty, tried to escape.
That's odd. Today's a day off, isn't it?
Hearing my strong, sharp voice, he turned around in surprise.
What? Jackson? You're supposed to be on parental leave, right? How come you're working? Well...
My husband, looking pathetic and flustered, had never dreamed I'd be with his boss. His mistress, the woman, also seemed quite surprised and was at a loss.
Hello, Ava. Long time no see. Yes.
The mistress called by name seemed nervous and unsure of what to do, looking down. The strange atmosphere was palpable, and I could feel the surrounding people staring at us.
Since we're drawing attention, let's move this to the room you guys booked. Unless you want me to scatter these photos around here, is that okay?
As I showed the photos that proved their affair to my staggering husband, he quickly grabbed my arm and pulled me into the elevator. Jackson caught the fleeing mistress and brought her along.
Why are you with Jackson?
The day you kicked me out, I had nowhere to go and was sitting in the park when Jackson heard our daughter crying and invited me in.
Seriously? It goes to show you can't do wrong and get away with it.
Upon entering the room, I dumped all the evidence I had gathered onto the table, leaving the two of them in shock.
What? These photos? I was here the day after you kicked me out of the house. It was shocking, but I took these as evidence of your affair. That's low. That's my line. Lying about work to meet your mistress and even taking parental leave, how despicable can you get?
My husband had no words for me, silenced by what I'd said. But I still had more to say.
I'm aware you used my savings without my consent. That money was a legacy from my mother. That's our shared property. I don't see an issue with me using it. What? It's not shared property. It's mine and mine alone. Really? Is that so? Yes, it is. So, you will return the $120,000 you used.
Come on, we're married. Let's not get into such tedious matters. Exhausted by his indifference, I swiftly pulled out the divorce papers from my bag and slammed them on the table.
I'm fed up with you. Fill out these divorce papers immediately. That's a leap, don't you think?
Didn't I hear you say you wanted me to bring up divorce? I played a recording of a conversation we had during a previous meal. His unbearable words echoed throughout the room.
Give me a break. Not a chance. To think you approached me just for my money. It all became clear after I heard our conversation from that day. That's why you became so cold all of a sudden. There's a lot to this situation. I don't want to hear any excuses or lies. Pay me $20,000 for the affair, $10,000 for all the times you mistreated me, $120,000 for the money you took from my savings, and $110,000 for child support until our daughter turns 20. That's a total of $260,000 in one lump sum. What? What mistreatment? You kicked me and our daughter out of the house in the middle of the night and didn't provide living expenses.
He clearly didn't expect his actions to become grounds for financial restitution in a divorce proceeding. Sweating profusely, his desperate plea for calm was pitiful.
Just calm down. Let's talk this out. Don't mock me. And don't think you're out of this either. I'll be seeking $20,000 in damages from you too.
When I pointed at his mistress, she turned pale.
I have to pay too? Of course. But in return, I'm divorcing him. So you two can be open about your relationship. That should be a relief, right? This is a problem.
I'm sorry. Forgive me. My desperate husband apologized while his mistress was speechless, her mouth gaping open. I took the house keys and card case from my husband's bag. I sold the house that was in my name. Jackson reported everything to the company, and it seems you're going to be fired. When I told your parents about this, they were absolutely furious. They're considering cutting ties with you. So you've lost everything, haven't you? Please, spare me this one time. I'll be a good husband, I promise. My husband's plea, his face a mess of tears and snot, was the most pitiful sight I'd ever seen, and it completely wiped away the last shreds of compassion I might have had for him. It's absolutely pathetic that he thought such a lie would work on me. We turned our backs on the sorry spectacle of those two and left the room. My husband was officially fired, losing not just his home but his workplace too. I didn't want to see my husband ever again, so I arranged for a divorce through a lawyer. I demanded compensation for the divorce, the money he had squandered, and child support. His parents were furious with him, and since he couldn't pay all the compensation in one go, his father forced him to work in a mine. He would have his wages garnished to pay me back. I got an immediate payment of $20,000 from his mistress. My daughter and I left the house we'd been living in, bought a small apartment, and started our new life. The moment we started living here, my daughter's night crying stopped completely. I'm really grateful for Jackson, who worries about us and calls us every now and then. Together with my daughter, I will build a happy, smile-filled home. Hey, what do you think about this woman?
Wow. She's stunning.
Right? I'm thinking of divorcing your mom and marrying her instead. What do you think?
That's awesome. We totally support you.
The three sons immediately showed their excitement at the idea of their mom being replaced by this beautiful woman. After seeing the picture of their dad, Nick's mistress, they fully supported Nick and my divorce without hesitation. I've worked so hard to raise you, and you have no gratitude?
Don't be so self-righteous. You chose to have us on your own. We're tired of your boring meals. You should just hire a housekeeper for the cleaning and laundry.
Steve, the eldest son, Arnold, the second son, and Cody, the youngest, started speaking their minds, saying whatever they wanted. It was clear that not only Nick, but also the boys no longer saw any value in me. There was no sign of appreciation for what I had done. Realizing that I was no longer needed by this family, I decided to leave the house without hesitation. A year after the divorce, I happened to run into Nick and the boys. They were stunned when they saw me.
How on earth can a woman who works from home live such a luxurious life?
When they found out that I was enjoying my life after the divorce, Nick and the boys regretted their actions and begged for my forgiveness. But I would never forgive them. My name is Risa. I was just an ordinary office worker in a typical company. I met Nick through a mutual colleague, and we got married. I want you to be a housewife and support me. And so, at Nick's request, I resigned from my job. After that, we were blessed with 3 sons. The boys grew up healthy and dedicated themselves to their studies, each pursuing their own paths. Nick, who worked for a large company, had a strong sense of pride and a competitive nature, which helped him climb the ranks to become the head of the accounting department. It was only a matter of time before he would be promoted to a managerial position. Nick was dedicated to his work, and the boys were busy with their studies. I was proud of them. As a housewife, I believed it was my role to support them from behind the scenes. So, I made sure to keep the house spotless and prepared nutritious meals for everyone. As the children grew older, many of my friends left their roles as housewives and returned to the workforce. However, Nick was extremely busy, and he was terrible at household chores, just like the boys. With all that, I knew that if I took on a part-time job, let alone a full-time one, I wouldn't have enough time to take care of the boys and manage the household. So, I decided to start working from home, doing computer-based freelance work that a friend introduced me to. Working from home meant I didn't have to commute, and I had the flexibility to manage my time. Although the income was modest, I didn't mind because I enjoyed keeping my hands busy.
Are you still doing that pathetic work from home job? How boring you are.
My laptop was spread out on the table in the living room. As I was working on another task for just 10 cents, Nick looked at it and laughed mockingly. Sure, it takes time, and it doesn't make much money, but it's actually pretty fun once you get into it.
Well, it suits you perfectly. But not for me, that's for sure.
Is she really doing that lame work from home thing again? How much do you make for each task? Steve chimed in, echoing Nick's disdainful tone as he walked into the room. Don't say that. It's just 10 cents per task, but if you do enough, it adds up. 10 cents? You can't buy anything with that. This is a total waste of time. Leave me alone. I'm not bothering you, am I? And this still helps with the household expenses. Nick mocking me was nothing new, but recently, the 3 boys had started to join in, looking down on me just like their father. My sons were high school and junior high school students. Maybe it was just that awkward age when mothers become annoying to their kids. I kept telling myself their attitudes would mellow out with time, but still, their words hurt me daily. Dinner's ready, everyone. That evening, like always, I prepared dinner, set the table, and called the family. They all reluctantly gathered in the dining room. As soon as they saw what was served, the boys started to complain.
Ugh! What is this?
Vegetables were on sale again. They're delicious.
Just vegetables? This is so depressing. We're growing teenagers. We need more meat.
What are you talking about? I carefully planned this meal with a balanced diet in mind, so stop complaining.
Oh. I wish we could have steak or pizza sometimes. Mom's cooking is always so bland, and I'm really getting tired of it.
We do eat out occasionally. Stop being so demanding. If we ate out every time you wanted, we'd go broke. Even though I argued back, the boys still sat down at the table, grumbling about their dissatisfaction. These kinds of petty squabbles were a daily occurrence, especially since they were going through puberty. But their rebelliousness had another cause. Nick's influence.
I want to eat something more luxurious too. Can't you make turkey sometimes? I come home exhausted from work, and all I get is this animal feed full of vegetables. It's awful. Stop complaining all the time. It's your attitude that's making the kids act so spoiled. Huh? Are you blaming me now? It's your boring meals that are the problem. Stop shifting the blame. You always call my meals boring, but it's tough trying to plan balanced meals within your salary. Fine, I get it.
Nick clicked his tongue but reluctantly started eating dinner. It was always like this. For the past few years, Nick had increasingly criticized me. And, just like him, the boys had started to make it a habit to belittle me. I had become the emotional punching bag for the entire family. After that dinner, I went into the kitchen to clean up. The rest of the family gathered in the living room to watch TV. Despite their constant complaints, none of them ever offered to help with the housework.
Wow. She's so cute. How do idols always have such clear skin? Well, it's because they're young. A far cry from someone we know,
Nick said, glancing in my direction, with that same mocking smirk on his face.
It's not just about youth. Look, this actress is the same age as Mom, but she's gorgeous. The world's unfair, isn't it? There are guys who get to marry such beautiful actresses.
Yeah, compared to her mom.
Mom has completely given up on being a woman. Her cooking is plain, her face is plain, and she doesn't even wear makeup. She's just done.
We really have it tough, don't we?
No doubt about it.
They all burst into laughter. What an awful atmosphere. I'd been feeling this way more and more lately. I had to listen to conversations like this every day. Sometimes I tried to argue back, but with 4 against 1, there was no way I could win. So, I just endured it silently, but living like this was piling up the stress. Nick used to be so kind. And my sons, too, they used to say,
"Mom, I love you."
But now, tears welled up in my eyes as I remembered the kind family they once were. Now, there wasn't a single person in this house who was on my side. And then one day, something happened that would mark the end of this miserable family life. "Why are your clothes just thrown around like this? How can you be so sloppy?" While Nick was taking a shower after coming home from work, I picked up the clothes he had carelessly discarded in the bathroom. Nick had always been a messy person, leaving his clothes scattered everywhere. If I didn't pick them up, the house would quickly become a mess. So, it had become my routine to clean up after him. I picked up the shirt that was lying on the floor. As I picked up the shirt, I noticed something strange.
What's that smell?
It wasn't detergent or body odor. It was an unpleasant scent. It was the smell of a woman's perfume. A strong fragrance was wafting from the clothes Nick had just taken off. Wondering what this could mean, I examined the shirt closely and found lipstick smudged on the collar.
Could this really be an affair?
The clear evidence of contact with another woman made my blood run cold. I immediately confronted Nick as he stepped out of the shower. I expected him to come up with some excuse, but his reaction was completely unexpected. Oh, so you found out. I let my guard down because you never noticed before.
What do you mean by before?
You really are clueless. Even when I said I was working late and came home late, you never suspected a thing. It made it easy for me to cheat whenever I wanted. In recent years, Nick had often said, "Work is busy." And his overtime and weekend work had increased. But it was all lies. He shamelessly admitted that he had been meeting with his mistress instead. The kids are grown now, so I don't need to be with you anymore. I'm sick of looking at your plain face every day. Hey, boys. Come here for a minute, I need to talk to you. Nick called out to our sons in their rooms. Wondering what was going on, the three of them came out. Nick pulled out his mobile phone and showed them the screen. So, what do you think of this woman?
Whoa! She's gorgeous.
Right? I'm thinking of divorcing your mom and marrying her instead. What do you think?
Huh? So, she'll be our new mom? That's awesome. I'm all for it.
The boys eagerly grabbed at the phone, staring at the screen.
Dad, you have to remarry. If she's our mom, I'll be a good boy. We're not against it at all. Let's swap moms.
Well. I'm glad you all like her. Guess what? She's a current model.
Really? No wonder she's so pretty. She's nothing like Mom. Yes. We're getting a new mom. How can you say that?
I was speechless at my son's heartless reactions. Normally, wouldn't they beg us not to divorce? But all three of them were completely ignoring my feelings, excitedly praising Nick's new wife-to-be.
How could you say that? I've done my best to raise you all these years. Don't you have any gratitude? Gratitude? You were the one who decided to have us.
Yeah, just because you're our mom doesn't mean you get to act all high and mighty. Exactly. Compared to this woman, you're so plain and, well, kind of poor-looking. We don't really need you around. My sons began voicing their complaints, saying things like, "We're sick of your boring meals. We could just hire a housekeeper to do the laundry and cleaning." There wasn't a trace of gratitude in their words. All right. I understand how you feel. You're saying I'm not needed in this house anymore.
Finally, you're getting it. That's exactly what we're saying. Now, let's get divorced.
With the support of our sons, Nick was beaming with satisfaction. How could I not be angry after hearing all this? Fine. I'll leave this house. Enjoy your new mother. Goodbye.
You don't have to tell me twice. I'm sure you'll struggle, but good luck.
None of them tried to stop me, and they all wore smug smiles. Having had enough of this family, I immediately packed my things and left the house. Soon after, I sent the divorce papers through a lawyer, and Nick and I finalized our divorce quickly. Nick got custody of the children, and we offset child support with any alimony.
You're just a housewife with only an income from working at home. Too bad you won't get any money.
Nick looked down on me with a triumphant attitude, but I didn't care about the money. All I wanted was to get the divorce finalized as quickly as possible. The emotional pain of being betrayed by my entire family would not heal easily. So I wanted to start a new life in a new place as soon as possible and forget about the past. With that in mind, I immediately started looking for a new home. A year has passed since then. After finishing my shopping, I parked my car in the garage as usual. Suddenly, several men appeared in front of me. They looked disheveled and somewhat shabby. It took me a moment to recognize them, but when I looked closer, I realized it was my ex-husband Nick and my 3 sons. "What do you want? What are you doing here?" We were supposed to have completely severed ties after the divorce. I had a bad feeling about this.
Mom, please help us.
Steve rushed over to me, almost in tears, clinging to me desperately. They began explaining how they had found my house. A few days ago, they had spotted me while I was shopping in town and decided to follow me. Normally, you wouldn't follow a mother you had abandoned. But they had a reason for wanting to follow me.
How can someone like you, who only does remote work, afford to shop at such an upscale store?
Nick, still in disbelief, demanded answers in a harsh tone. Judging by their appearance, it was clear they didn't have any money. Meanwhile, I now owned a company and lived in a luxurious neighborhood known in this area. The store where they had spotted me was a high-end brand boutique that the average person would not easily step into. Noticing my well-dressed appearance by chance, my former family had caught the scent of money.
How can you, who only worked from home, afford to live in a house like this? Are you some rich man's mistress or something?
I was taken aback by Nick's sudden appearance and accusatory tone. Even after the divorce, he still wanted to belittle me, but I certainly hadn't become wealthy by relying on someone else, as Nick suggested. I had kept it a secret from the family, but I actually had a substantial fortune. Before getting married, when I was working as an office employee, I had started investing with my retirement money. Now, that investment had grown to a value of $5 million, allowing me to live comfortably without having to work.
If that's the case, then you didn't need to do remote work at all.
Nick shouted when I confessed this to him.
The profits I made from my investments are my personal assets. And besides, I enjoyed doing remote work. I knew if I told you and the boys about the money, you'd all just become dependent on me. So there's no reason for you to blame me for keeping it a secret.
Nick was right. I didn't need to do remote work at all. But I had started it to have something to talk about with my mom friends, who were also doing remote work. And I continued it as a hobby because I enjoyed the meticulous tasks, even if it didn't bring in much money.
Remote work was actually a lot of fun. Oh, and after we separated, I threw myself into real estate investments to keep myself busy. My assets just kept growing, and now I'm struggling with tax issues.
Nick and even my sons couldn't hide their shock at my words. Seeing my sons for the first time in a while, I noticed they looked pale and unhealthy, far worse than before. You all look pretty unwell. Are you eating properly? Even though Nick had custody, they were still my sons. And I couldn't help but worry about them.
That woman's ruined everything for us.
Steve responded to my concern with bitter complaints. It turns out that Nick's affair partner, Cindy, who he had planned to marry, never intended to marry him. She had only used her charms to get close to him for his money. Nick, who had fallen in love with her at first sight in a nightclub, had been treating her to expensive dinners and showering her with luxury brand gifts. But when he finally proposed to her, she bluntly turned him down, saying,
"I'm not interested in some older guy with kids and a divorce history."
However, Nick, unable to give up on her, hired a private investigator to track down where she lived. It turned out she was actually married and was also involved with another man.
That woman deceived me. She said she was single, but I never imagined she was married. She tricked me.
Nick seemed deeply frustrated at having been fooled. But this was the same man who had abandoned me in the first place.
Mom, we've realized how much we need you since living apart. Yeah, without you, the house is filthy, and we're sick of eating nothing but store-bought meals. Please, come back and help us.
My sons began tearfully pleading with me to return home. All right. I let out a sigh, and, overwhelmed by their persistence, I told them I would come back. They all cheered gleefully, shouting,
"Yay!
However, deep down, I was utterly exasperated by their selfishness. When I visited what was once my home, the inside was filled with discarded clothes and accumulated garbage, producing a foul odor. Since I left, no one had been doing any housework, leading to constant complaints from the neighbors. Why are there 4 grown men in this house, yet no one cleans up?
What? Housework is a woman's job, isn't it? Why should a man have to do it?
Now that you're back, things will go back to normal, right?
Oh, thank goodness. I was getting sick of living in such a filthy house.
Their selfish attitudes made me realize that I had failed in raising my children. Influenced by Nick, my sons had grown into men who couldn't do anything for themselves but were full of complaints.
If mom's rich, then we can say goodbye to living in poverty, right?
Living in poverty? But Dad has an income, doesn't he? Well, according to my sons, Nick had spent most of his income on his affair partner. Although they should have had some savings, those had quickly run out. And they were now in a situation where they couldn't afford to pay for the 3 boys' education. Steve and Arnold had dropped out of high school, and Cody had even given up on going to high school altogether. So we're all working part-time, but even then, it's tough for the 4 of us to make ends meet. On top of that, Nick, unable to manage the debts, had gone so far as to misuse his position as an accountant to embezzle money from his company. The embezzlement was quickly discovered, but fearing damage to their corporate image, the company reported it to the police, leading to Nick's dismissal from his job. Although Nick struggled daily to find a new job, rumors of the embezzlement had spread, and he was having difficulty securing employment. In an attempt to cope with the stress, Nick turned to alcohol, and combined with an unhealthy diet, he was now suffering from illness.
Please, help us!
Prideful Nick had swallowed his pride and was begging me for help. It was clear that their situation had reached a very desperate point.
We can't do anything without you, Mom. We're begging you too. Please come back.
My sons joined in, pleading along with Nick. All 4 of them bowed their heads to me. However, I felt no inclination to help them. This is your own fault, isn't it? After everything you did, how dare you come crawling back to someone you threw away? I looked down at them coldly as I spoke. They probably thought that if they begged tearfully, I would forgive them, but that wasn't going to happen. There was no way I could forget the way they had treated me.
You told me you didn't need a plain wife or mother. Well, I feel the same. No matter how much you bow your heads, I don't need a husband or sons who mock and discard others.
As I spoke, I took my wallet out of my bag. There was $1,000 in it. I placed it on the table.
Consider this your severance pay. Never show yourselves in front of me again. Nick, and you boys as well, stop relying on others and figure things out for yourselves. It's pathetic.
I glared at the 4 of them as I said this. They muttered, "But," and hung their heads. I left the living room and closed the door behind me. The moment I did, I heard them fighting over the money from the living room, shouting,
"That's my money!"
Seeing how far they had fallen saddened me, but I hoped they would somehow manage to survive on their own. After that, Nick and the boys sold the house they had been living in and moved into a smaller one. Although Nick struggled to find a new job, he eventually managed to get hired by a construction company, where he worked long hours doing unfamiliar manual labor from morning until evening to take care of his sons. It seemed that he had finally developed a sense of responsibility as a father. It was likely a tough life, but I heard he was working hard without complaining. Just like their father, Steve and Arnold were also working and living on site. As for Cody, who had dropped out and couldn't attend high school, he was now going to high school while working part-time to help with the family's finances. They had not escaped poverty yet, but knowing that they were living much more decently than before gave me some peace of mind. Even though I had left because I was fed up with their terrible treatment, they were once my precious family. I truly hope that from now on, they'll grow into adults who can take care of themselves. That's what I thought. Meanwhile, I decided to remodel a room in my house and start a handicraft class. I've always been good with my hands, so I thought I'd turn something I love into a job. Nowadays, word of mouth has brought many students to my classes, and we enjoy a fun time together, often ending the lessons with a tea party. Although I was betrayed by my family and left all alone, this has allowed me to live freely and without being looked down upon by anyone. Even though I'm apart from my sons, I pray for their health and happiness while embracing a life where I can do as I please from now on.
You cheated on me, didn't you?
My husband Tom was holding our newborn baby and shouted right in front of me. I had just finished the huge task of giving birth and returned to my hospital room, and that's what my husband said to me.
What are you talking about?
I had absolutely no idea what he meant. I've been faithful to Tom since before we got married, and I have no reason to do something like that after getting married. I couldn't understand why he would say such a thing, and I was furious that he would say that to his wife right after giving birth.
This baby's eyes are blue. You cheated on me with a foreigner, didn't you? That's impossible!
I yelled back without thinking. I retorted while enduring the pain in my body. Tom quickly put the baby in the bassinet, as if he had touched something dirty. I was angry that he reacted that way to our own child. I picked the baby back up. The baby suddenly opened its eyes. They were clear blue eyes, like glass. How? Both Tom and I have brown eyes. I've never seen eyes this blue before.
I really didn't cheat on you. I have no idea why this happened. Don't lie. There's no other explanation except that you cheated. I'm telling you, it's not possible. I really don't know why.
I gave birth to this child myself, so there's no doubt it's my baby. I've never heard of any foreigners in my or Tom's family. If that's the case, I truly don't understand why this child has blue eyes.
Please, let's do a DNA test.
A DNA test should prove this child's relationship to Tom. When I desperately pleaded, Tom stared at me intently.
If this child isn't yours, I'll divorce you. I'll even pay alimony. But I really have no idea how this happened. This is your child. Please, just let me prove it.
Tom's voice echoed in the silent hospital room. His answer was, "My name is Sophie. I'm turning 29 this year. I work an office job at a company in Boston. I was born in the South, but I've lived in Boston ever since I got into college. I'm married to Tom, who is 1 year older than me, and we live together. Tom works at a sports equipment company. Having grown up in a snowy area, I joined the ski club as soon as I started college. Tom was an upperclassman in the club at the time. He wasn't as used to snow as I was. But he loves sports and got hooked on skiing during a high school trip, so he went to ski resorts whenever he had the chance after that. He's quite skilled. Tom and I hit it off right away, since we both wanted to improve our skiing techniques. We always participated in the club's ski trips together, so naturally we started spending more time together and got closer. Then 6 months later, Tom said he wanted to date me seriously. That's how we became a couple, and our relationship progressed smoothly after that. After graduating, we both started working in Boston. I had become a working adult 1 year earlier. I moved into Tom's apartment and we started living together. Of course, the reason we chose to live together was that we wanted to be with each other. But that wasn't the only reason. Before graduating, we had discussed that we wanted to get married eventually, so establishing a financial foundation came first. If I lived in Tom's place, we could put all the rent money into savings instead. That way we could save up for our wedding faster. With that in mind, we cut back on ski trips until we had enough saved up. Eventually, Tom and I both gained more work experience and felt like we could continue our jobs long term. We reached our savings goal. Thrilled that we could finally get married, we decided to meet each other's parents first. My parents live far away, so both of us would need to take time off to visit them. Inevitably, we ended up going to Tom's parents' place first. Actually, Tom had only recently told his parents about dating me. Apparently they're old-fashioned and believe unmarried couples should keep their relationship pure.
It's a very traditional area, so my parents don't approve of premarital relationships until the future is decided.
My hometown is rural too, so I get it. Times have changed, but it can't be helped.
That's why they think you and I are still living separately. If they ask, just go along with that.
We had this conversation and firmly swore to absolutely never reveal that we were already living together before heading to Tom's parents' house. Tom's family runs a small woodworking business, with a factory located next to their home. The factory was originally started by Tom's grandfather, and his father-in-law Dylan is now the second-generation owner. They employ a handful of skilled craftsmen who create custom furniture and interior decor pieces using locally sourced wood. Although it's a small operation, they have long-standing business relationships with companies dating back to Tom's grandfather's days, so while it's not an easy business, they seem to be doing relatively well compared to others in the same trade.
When I was a kid, Dad always told me, "Tom, you're going to take over as the boss one day, so start learning the ropes now." I was constantly made to help out at the factory. So when I decided to go to college, Dad wasn't happy about it.
Has Dylan decided who will take over the factory after him?
No, the craftsmen we have now are skilled but have zero interest in the business side of things. We've tried training younger workers, but no one sticks around long. I think Dad still hopes I'll come back and take over.
Do you have any intentions of coming back here in the future, Tom?
No way. I enjoy my current job that allows me to be involved with skiing. If I ever change careers, it would have to be something ski-related or I definitely wouldn't last.
I was relieved to hear there was no chance of Tom taking over his family's factory. Inheriting the business would inevitably mean I'd be expected to support him and put down roots in that area too. I couldn't imagine living in an unfamiliar place, having to tiptoe around my seemingly old-fashioned parents-in-law. During that first visit to Tom's family home, I came face to face with Tom's parents, who would soon officially become my parents-in-law. We were shown to the living room where I deeply bowed my head to them.
I'm sure I have many shortcomings, but I will do my best to support Tom. I hope for your kind guidance for many years to come.
Yes, of course. I had pondered my words for days and even practiced, but my mother-in-law Caddy simply brushed them off. It was a bit anticlimactic. Still, at least Caddy had replied. Dylan stayed sullenly silent without a word, making me worried I had somehow angered him. But then Tom immediately started a normal conversation, so I figured these two must always be this distant.
By the way, Sophie, what do you do for work?
It was the first time Caddy properly spoke to me. I had expected her to ask about my upbringing or hometown at a time like this, so it threw me off that her first question was about my job. Nevertheless, I explained that I work an office job.
And about how much do you make annually?
She followed up, leaving me momentarily at a loss for words. Is that really something you suddenly asked your son's fiancé? Tom quickly interjected.
That's not something you ask so bluntly.
And warned his mother for me. But even after that, they peppered me with rather blatant questions at every turn, like the rent for the place I live now, and how much property and assets my parents own. Honestly, it was exhausting to field what felt like an interrogation into my and my family's financial situation. I snuck a glance at Tom beside me, who was sending me an apologetic look. Given that Tom's family has made their living running a factory for generations, perhaps they have very strict views about money. The barrage of questions earlier may have been their way of ascertaining whether I or any of my relatives are in debt. And if so, whether there was any risk of their son getting dragged into it. Maybe he wanted to confirm something like that. If they're just concerned about their son being suddenly saddled with a huge debt after marriage, I guess I can understand their perspective to some extent. At the time, I tried not to dwell on it too much. As soon as Caddy finished her spiel, Dylan opened his mouth as if he'd been waiting for his cue.
Well then, why don't you go ahead and take a tour of the factory right away?
His words caught me off guard. Just when I thought Dylan had finally deigned to speak to me, he's suggesting a factory tour out of the blue. Of course, It's his future son-in-law's family business, and I should probably have some idea of what it entails. But I can still hear the sound of machinery operating in the factory even now. Surely they don't expect me to go introduce myself to the employees on the spot like this, do they? The thought made me a bit nervous.
You don't have to remember everything all at once.
As Dylan started to stand up while saying this, Tim stopped him.
Both of you, cut it out already. We came today with the intention of just making introductions. There's no need to show her the factory, is there? Besides, what do you mean she doesn't have to remember it all at once? When she doesn't have to remember anything at all?
Chastened by Tim's forceful tone, Dylan reluctantly sat back down. Tim was absolutely right. It was clear from Dylan's choice of words that he was assuming I would eventually support Tim in taking over the factory. Apparently, Dylan still harbors hopes of having Tim inherit the business. At this point, I was starting to feel a very distinct sense of wariness towards these in-laws. Showing such blatant interest in my financial situation upon first meeting, and scheming from the start to tie me to the family factory that goes beyond just being tactless, in my opinion. This is a bit of an unbelievable situation. I understand that marrying Tim means inevitably being connected to these people. But I was realizing with stark clarity that having a close relationship with them in my daily life would be impossible. Sensing the increasingly tense atmosphere, Tim stepped in.
Any further discussion can wait until we meet again.
With that, he wrapped things up and we were done. As we were about to leave, Caddy was trying to tell Tim something in a low voice while walking with us. Tim was clearly exasperated as he dealt with her. And so, I was finally able to get away from Tim's family home. I found out later that Caddy's parting complaint to him were,
just because you're married doesn't mean you should become distant from your family. Make sure you think carefully and visit home.
It seemed like a pretty blatant guilt trip, but from Caddy's perspective, maybe she feels a sense of loneliness, as if I've stolen Tim away from her. But Tim seems exhausted by both Dylan pressuring him to take over the factory and Caddy constantly demanding excessive family time. He clearly has no desire to see them frequently. Of course, it's not like their relationship is hostile. Quirks aside, I'm sure Tim's parents act this way because they care about him. And Tim himself doesn't seem to want to stir up discord with them either. I wanted to respect Tim's feelings too. However, after talking to them for the first time today, I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't handle a life with frequent meddling from those in-laws. I told Tim my honest feelings. I even conveyed that if there was any possibility of living with those two, it might make marriage itself difficult. Of course I love Tim, but I'm convinced that I'd be unable to maintain my peace of mind living together with those people.
My parents can be unintentionally overbearing with their opinions sometimes, so it's totally understandable that you feel that way, Sophie.
That's what Tim said.
I'm not considering ever living with them long term. And I absolutely won't let our lives get so intertwined that you end up dealing with their interference, Sophie.
He promised. I didn't want to reconsider my decision to get married, so I was truly relieved when he said that. However, even though we refrained from contacting them, my in-laws didn't do the same. Immediately after the greetings, my in-laws started making various proposals and demands to us. The most troublesome thing was their meddling in our wedding plans.
Tim is our only son and he's precious to us, so we want you to have the wedding in the way that has been passed down in this family for generations.
They kept insisting persistently. From an early stage, Tim and I had planned to have the wedding ceremony in a church and the reception as a small-scale event with only close relatives and friends. But Tim's parents even demanded that we hold the ceremony in their hometown. Furthermore, when they said we should make the reception bigger so they could invite many of their relatives, I felt anger welling up inside me. I don't want them interfering with our important ceremony. I told Tim that I wanted him to make them stop meddling any further. Of course, Tim felt the same way I did, but he looked pained being caught between his parents and me, so this time I decided to yield. Considering our life after marriage, I told my in-laws that we wanted to postpone the ceremony until we could save up a bit more money so we wouldn't use up all our savings on just the wedding, and smoothed things over for the moment. And so, our married life started while postponing the ceremony. I told my colleagues at work and friends that we decided to use the money for the reception on our daily life instead. Most of our acquaintances of the same generation agreed it was a more rational and better choice. For me, it was disappointing not being able to have a wedding ceremony, but I was very happy that we could officially submit the marriage registration and become husband and wife. And finally, our married life began. We were already living together, but living with a clear perspective on how we would overcome the rest of our lives together felt very fresh. And avoiding direct contact with my in-laws didn't cause anything in particular that made the relationship deteriorate. 2 years passed by in a flash, and I became pregnant with Tim's child and gave birth to a healthy baby boy without any issues. When I returned to my hospital room from the delivery room, Tim, who had been eagerly awaiting my son and I, walked up and held our child for the first time. I expected him to let out a cry of joy, but instead, doubtful words reached my ears as I finished giving birth.
His eyes are blue. Why? Is this child not mine?
I couldn't understand what he meant. Why was Tim glaring at me with such a grim expression? I tried to think with my still exhausted and dazed mind, but nothing came to mind.
What are you saying? That child is yours, Tim. What's wrong with his eyes? Look for yourself. His eyes are blue. Those aren't the eyes of our family. Since you undoubtedly gave birth to him, doesn't that mean he has a blue-eyed foreigner for a father? Are you saying I cheated on you? I absolutely never did such a thing. Then why are his eyes blue? Both of us have brown eyes. I've never heard of a blue-eyed child being born between two brown-eyed people.
I tried to say something in return, but a nurse who came running in surprise at the commotion intervened, and the situation settled down for the moment. After some time passed, I spoke with Tim again. Tim had regained his composure on the surface, but his eyes were still harsh as he looked at me. More than anything, he wouldn't even try to hold our son. He thought I had cheated on him with a blue-eyed man who wasn't him and gave birth to that man's child. I had absolutely never betrayed him like that. However, the fact was that our son's eyes were blue. I couldn't explain the reason why.
It's not that you can't explain, you just don't want to admit you cheated, right? Please believe me. There must be some way we can investigate this.
I somehow managed to say that, and just as it occurred to me that we could surely prove it if we had the genes tested, my in-laws burst into the hospital room.
Dad, Mom, why are you here?
Tim raised his voice in surprise. Tim shouldn't have told my in-laws that I had gone into labor, being considerate of how I wanted to avoid meeting them as much as possible. Of course, we couldn't not inform them of the birth, but we had intended to let them know after both the baby and I had fully settled down after the delivery.
I have an acquaintance among the nurses here.
And of course she knows about Tim, so she went out of her way to let us know that our grandchild was about to be born.
Not informing us of the birth of our first grandchild, what an unfilial son. Well, I guess I was kind of the same when you were born though.
The two of them had the biggest smiles on their faces that I had ever seen.
You just had a baby, so why do you have such a displeased look on your face?
Yeah, the child was born healthy. But since I found out it's not mine, of course I'd have this kind of expression.
At the words Tim spat out, my in-laws exchanged glances with a look of incomprehension. Eventually, my mother-in-law peered at the baby's face and let out a loud voice.
It's true. This isn't Tim's child. Look at his eyes, he has blue eyes. What did you say?
My father-in-law, who had also shouted and stared at the baby.
You're right. His eyes are blue. I've never seen a child with eyes like that,
he said, turning back to face me. What is the meaning of this, Sophie? Were you planning on tricking Tim into raising some foreigner's child? What an appalling woman.
I thought you seemed rather distant when we met, but to think you had such intentions. That's not it. There must be some reason for this. I'm sure we'll understand if we investigate.
It was painful to have them hurl such heart-wrenching words at me one after another. But what hurt the most was that Tim, who should have been protecting me, was glaring at me together with my in-laws. A nurse, unable to bear watching my in-laws shouting in further agitation, calling me an adulterous woman and saying they'd make me pay compensation and divorce, ushered them out of the room. When she said she would call the police if they continued making a commotion and disturbing the mental stability of the patient, my in-laws finally withdrew quietly. I had fallen from the heights of being blessed with a son to the depths of despair. More than anything, the shock of being turned away by Tim, who should have been my greatest ally, left me unable to even shed tears and simply dumbfounded. After a while, my in-laws said,
"There's no point in looking at the face of someone else's child,"
and left. Tim sat silently with an air of not wanting to even look at the baby I was holding.
"I rushed out of the office because you went into labor, so what am I supposed to say when my colleagues congratulate me? Ugh."
I learned for the first time that Tim was capable of such cruelty. As I sat there unable to say anything more, Tim stood up.
"I'm not coming here anymore,"
he said coldly and tried to leave the room. Was this the end of my relationship with Tim and we would get divorced? The anxiety of whether this child would suddenly lose his father washed over me.
"Hey, wait! I know it's impossible to just ask you to believe me. So at least, before you end your relationship with me, please listen to one last request from me."
Hearing that, Tim reluctantly stopped in his tracks.
"Please ask the hospital to do a DNA test. The results should be available in about a week. If it determines he's not your child, then you can abandon me. You can even demand compensation. I haven't betrayed you. Even if we find out much later when the child grows up that he is yours, it will be too late to start over as father and son then."
My final plea seemed to reach Tim's heart, if only slightly. Tim said,
"Fine. That will make the truth clear,"
and left the room. After that, I wasn't in any state of mind to talk to anyone. I told the nurse that I couldn't see anyone else until my parents, whom I had contacted as soon as I went into labor, arrived, and had her refuse any visitors. That night, my parents, who had forcibly transferred trains to get there, rushed to the hospital barely in time for visiting hours. The moment I saw my parents' faces for the first time in a while, I shed tears of relief that someone had finally come who would be on my side.
"You did really well."
"What happened to Tim? Has he not come yet?" Asked that, I hesitated over whether to tell them what had happened here until then. But I had nothing to be ashamed of, and I thought that if the results of the upcoming test came out, my relationship with Tim could be repaired, so I decided to keep quiet to avoid giving my parents unnecessary worry. I made the painful excuse that Tim had been with me until just before, but he had to go back to the office for a bit because there was some work he absolutely had to do himself. And my mother Lenore gently held my son, whom neither Tim nor my in-laws had held, and peered at his face. What kind of reaction would Lenore have upon seeing his blue eyes? If she reacted the same way as Tim and the others? Thinking that, I couldn't look at Lenore's face and inadvertently lowered my head.
"Oh, how adorable. His features take after Tim, don't they? Let me see. Oh, you're right. But the shape of his nose resembles Sophie."
My father Sullivan also looked happy. It was a very ordinary reaction for grandparents seeing their first grandchild, but their response full of joy made me truly happy from the bottom of my heart.
"Look, this child has blue eyes too. Just like when Sophie was born."
I reflexively raised my head.
"What?"
and let out a surprised. My eyes met those of my parents, who were smiling with faces full of affection.
My eyes were blue when I was born too.
"That's right. Oh, did we never tell you?"
It wasn't that uncommon among our relatives. We probably didn't think it was worth mentioning. Wondering what on earth they were talking about, I asked for a more detailed explanation. My mother didn't have particularly detailed knowledge, but apparently my father had heard a more in-depth explanation from a doctor friend of his, so he explained it to me. Even if a person was born with blue eyes, there are cases where the color changes due to genetics. The frequency tends to be higher in the South when looking nationwide, and it's known that the area where I was born has an especially high tendency for that. And it's also apparently quite common for eyes that were blue to gradually approach the level of brown as the child grows. I was a child who fit that exact case. Indeed, I had been told a few times before that my eye color looked lighter. My eye color probably looks a bit lighter than other people's because what were originally blue eyes gradually turned brown. But since this wasn't an unusual story where I'm from, it seems my parents never mentioned it to me after I grew up. However, my mother said she must have told me about it a few times when I was little. If that's true, I may have just let it go in one ear and out the other. But I didn't care about such minor details. Knowing the reason why I had a blue-eyed child and that I could properly explain it to Tim now, the tears I had been holding back started flowing out. My parents, surprised by my sudden crying, held my shoulders in bewilderment. For a while, I just indulged in that sensation and continued crying. During that time, my son stayed cradled in my mother's arms, breathing peacefully in his sleep. Eventually, when my parents heard from me about what had just happened, they became furious. I had never seen my parents display such intense anger before. My parents immediately tried to call Tim, who had gone home earlier, to come back. But since visiting hours were almost over, they said they would meet Tim outside and left the hospital room. I heard later that my father had expressed his tremendous anger to Tim, saying,
"How could you not believe your wife's story at all, not even hold the baby, and go home like that?"
And Tim had been thoroughly contrite. He told Tim about the area where I was born and raised, about the mechanism behind the different eye color. He apparently even sent Tim photos of neighborhood children with blue eyes to show him. And Tim was apparently convinced by that. I was told that if my mother hadn't intervened at the end, my father looked ready to punch Tim. Hearing that Tim had apologized with tears in his eyes, saying he was truly sorry, I felt my intense anger towards him abate slightly. The next day, Tim took an emergency day off work and rushed to my hospital room first thing in the morning to apologize for his words and actions yesterday.
"I'm sorry. I had this preconceived notion that if both parents have brown eyes, the child will always be born with brown eyes too. I judged based solely on the bias that a child's eyes can't be blue unless one of the parents has blue eyes."
It's okay. I didn't know that my eyes were blue when I was little either. Or rather, I didn't remember. And the DNA test results aren't back yet, so right now I'm just happy you believe this story.
Tim promised to take responsibility for clearing up his parents' misunderstanding himself, and vowed not to create any more opportunities for me to come face to face with them in the future. Later, Tim called his parents home, but when that didn't work, he apparently ended up going directly to their house to explain the situation. However, it seems that even so, his parents wouldn't abandon their suspicion towards me. They stubbornly insisted that we still couldn't know until the DNA test results came back, and even criticized Tim for discarding his doubts so quickly. But this time, Tim had also looked into and come to understand that there was a possibility of blue-eyed children being born even from brown-eyed parents, and had come to believe in my innocence. However, no matter how much Tim explained those things, his parents wouldn't listen at all. On the contrary, they insulted us, saying we were just putting on an act and even getting the neighbors involved. They even went so far as to say that if Tim broke up with me and took over the factory soon, they would find him a better woman. Tim finally exploded in anger at their utter lack of obedience.
"If you two continue to insult Sophie like this, I'm cutting ties with you."
And apparently stormed out, saying so. And about a week passed. Our son had no health issues whatsoever, and by then I had completely recovered from the initial uproar. And on the day I was discharged from the hospital with our son, the DNA test results arrived. Tim, who had purposely brought the unopened results all the way from home to my hospital room, opened the envelope in front of me. It stated that a high enough match rate to definitively say the baby was mine and Tim's child had been confirmed. Tim stared long and hard at the test results, and finally bowed his head deeply to me and said, "I'm truly sorry." I couldn't completely forgive him with just this apology after he had hurled such verbal abuse at me. But Tim had been convinced until that moment that a child inherits the eye color of either the father or mother. But I had thought the same thing. If the child born looked nothing like one's own at a glance, perhaps one would get flustered like that. Thinking that, I couldn't bring myself to say we should divorce. Tim, who apologized to me many times over, said he would tell his parents about these results and left the house. I didn't want to have any contact with his parents in any form, so I even thought it would be fine not telling them at all.
If we leave this misunderstanding as is, my parents might scheme something to make us divorce using this as a reason. They're already spreading rumors to the neighbors. So I have to properly convey the facts to them.
Hearing Tim say that, I decided to leave his parents to Tim and not think about it at all. Eventually, Tim returned after finishing the phone call and said with a relieved expression,
I explained it to them properly. Just in case, I also took a photo of the test results and emailed it to them. I told them I'm not going to visit them in the future and asked them not to come see us either.
With those words, I could feel that all my connections to his parents had vanished. However, as I was preparing to be discharged and going through the procedures for billing and such, his parents showed up. After that phone call, they had immediately hailed a taxi and rushed over. I heard Tim,
I told them not to come,
who was carrying our luggage, mutter,
Sophie, I heard it's been proven the baby is Tim's son. That's great. Now everything can be smoothed over. Yeah, and it's a boy too. Thank you for giving birth to a healthy heir.
I was speechless. There's an expression to flip-flop on someone, but this wasn't like that at all. It was as if they had flipped the heavens and earth with how drastically their attitude had changed. Could it be the same mouths saying these words that had cursed me as an adulteress?
Take this chance to divorce her and get compensation money.
And hurled insults at me just days ago. As I stood there dumbfounded, Tim, who had been standing in front of me, dropped his shoulders and crouched down on the spot. Tim apparently felt so deflated he couldn't stand at the sight of his parents' utterly self-centered behavior. As if not to miss that chance, my mother-in-law slipped past Tim and approached right in front of me.
Here, let me hold him.
I instinctively drew back from my mother-in-law, who was extending both hands. Then even my father-in-law approached. You too, as the child grows bigger your place will likely get too cramped, so you can come live with us. Luckily we have plenty of land, so we can even add on to the house. The grandchild will probably be happier with more liveliness too. I felt slightly dizzy. To think they'd even suggest living together. Perhaps they have no sense of shame. Staying with these people any longer would likely impede my postpartum recovery. But I didn't want to line up my words here and argue back either. No matter what I said, my father-in-law probably wouldn't listen, and more than anything, I didn't want to let my newborn son hear my angry voice. I brushed away my mother-in-law's hands that persistently kept reaching out trying to hold my son, approached the taxi they had arrived in, and conveyed my intention to get in with my gaze. Tim, who had been standing there dumbfounded, noticed my desire to leave this place as soon as possible and helped me get in, pushing aside his parents who were standing there stunned at being blatantly ignored.
Hurry and go!
Tim also got in and told the driver. The taxi immediately drove off, leaving the hospital behind. For a moment, I saw the sight of his dumbfounded parents seeing us off reflected in the side mirror, but I never looked back again. Later, Tim reluctantly answered one of the several calls that came in from his parents. In a cold voice, Tim told his parents on the other end of the line that he was cutting ties with them.
I want Dad and Mom to have absolutely no involvement in our lives anymore. To not even apologize to Sophie and suggest living together is unthinkable as human beings. I won't let either of you see Sophie or our son at all. Please don't think of our son as your grandchild. I'll never let you two meet him, so give up.
Saying that, he hung up and immediately did something on his mobile phone before putting it away. After that, no more calls came in, so I assumed he had blocked their numbers, but Tim told me without saying anything unnecessary that we would never be bothered about this matter again. However, knowing his parents, no matter how strongly Tim declared he was cutting ties with them, in the end they might even show up at our apartment. But even if his parents took such actions, I knew I no longer had to worry about anything. Actually, a little before our son was born, Tim had gotten a job as a ski resort manager through an introduction from an acquaintance. Tim had been so eager to work in a job related to skiing that he had specifically chosen to work at a sports equipment company. So when he received word of this position,
I definitely want to do it.
He was overjoyed and had replied. That place was in my hometown, where my parents also live. For me too, this job offer had the best possible conditions. If possible, I had wanted to give birth at a hospital there, but by the time this job change was decided, my due date was fast approaching. Transferring to a different hospital suddenly during this time was high risk, and more than anything, there were few hospitals that handled deliveries there and they were all full with local pregnant women. So in that case, we had decided I would give birth at the hospital here where I had been receiving regular checkups from the beginning. That was the situation, so we had decided to wait until our son was old enough for long-distance travel and move the whole family together. We finished relocating our base of living while keeping this move and job change hidden from Tim's parents until the very end. By the time a month had passed since our son was born, everything was over. Fortunately, our son grew up healthy in both mind and body, and no issues arose at all during the long-distance move. In the end, during the time it took for us to finish moving like that, his parents never showed up at our apartment. Several years have passed since then, but an opportunity to have contact with his parents has yet to come. Our son, who is now running around energetically, continues to grow up without even knowing of his grandparents' existence. At one point, I had a chance to talk with an acquaintance living near his parents' house, and they told me about the recent state of affairs around that factory. After we suddenly cut off contact, not only were they unable to see their grandson, but even their only son Tim avoided them, and apparently this caused both his parents to completely lose their energy. Perhaps because Dylan's vigor had declined, he was unable to turn around the factory's performance that had been on a downward trend, and he apparently decided on his own to shut it down. The factory that Dylan had been so eager to have Tim take over and even pass on to his grandchild no longer exists. The acquaintance had seen my mother-in-law Caddy out shopping a few times, but said she seemed lifeless. Eventually Caddy injured her leg and it impeded her mobility, and she apparently became unable to even do housework satisfactorily. Dylan, who had no life skills and had never even done his own laundry, was apparently seen by people many times wearing terribly dirty clothes. And now, it seems both that house and factory are deserted and have become completely vacant. This is just my guess, but I think the two of them, having lost their ability to live on their own, were probably taken into a facility for elderly support or something similar by the government. Of course, I have no intention of going out of my way to confirm their whereabouts. And we, the husband and wife who became ski resort managers, are working hard at our jobs every day in the dreamlike environment of working at the ski resort we love. Since it's an environment where we can visit my parents' home with just a little travel, we go back and forth and help each other out when needed. My parents come over all the time, making up various excuses because they want to see their grandson even when they don't really need help. Our son is very attached to my parents too and really looks forward to seeing them. Having frequently gone to the ski resort from the time he gained awareness, our son is naturally showing an interest in skiing. He's already imitating skiing form and making us and my parents smile. Once this child grows up enough to be able to ski, the day will surely come when we can all ski together as a family. I can hardly wait for that day to arrive.
I'm pregnant.
Suddenly, that's what Barbara, who claims to be my best friend and a colleague, told me. She said the father is my fiancé. I, who felt out of place and burdened at work because my fiancé was taken by an incompetent woman, ended up resigning. Little did I dream that a great reversal in life awaited me. My name is Sandra, and I'm 28 years old. I work in the cartoon section of a publishing house. It's odd to say this about myself, but I am fairly competent. I handle 3 cartoon artists. One is a hit maker who's a star of the magazine, another is a veteran with enthusiastic fans. And the last one is a promising newcomer who seems capable of carrying the magazine's future. They all trust me with their manuscripts. The basic job of an editor is to assist the cartoon artists under their charge and ensure the manuscripts are finished by the deadline. This includes gathering materials, delivering them to the workplace, bringing refreshments to encourage the assistants, and sometimes brainstorming ideas together. Being a cartoon artist means creating worlds with just a pen and giving dreams and hope to the readers, I believe. Actually, I used to draw cartoon during my student days. I had a dream of becoming a cartoon artist, but realizing I lacked the talent, I decided to help bring cartoon to the world by becoming an editor. Sandra really loves cartoon, says Donald, my colleague and boyfriend. We've been dating for about 2 years now, and we're talking about getting married soon, so he's practically my fiancé. It's not a job where sitting from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. is enough, if a cartoon artist I'm in charge of contacts me. I often have to rush over outside of normal hours, so it's hard to match schedules with regular office workers. That's why dating Donald, who's also in editing, is convenient. though it's tough to find time for dates.
Sandra is lucky with her charges.
That's Barbara speaking, another colleague from the same batch. She used to edit for a girls' cartoon magazine at the same publisher. But after being disliked by a female cartoon artist she was in charge of, she had to change departments. While it's true that cartoon artists can be difficult or eccentric, in this case, I think Barbara was the problem. She's often late, full of excuses, and quick to blame others. Still, because she looks cute and seems modest and quiet, it was suggested that she might do better handling male cartoon artists for a boys' magazine rather than female ones for a girls' magazine. Which is how she ended up in my department under circumstances that might be frowned upon nowadays. Maybe I'm lucky, but I also put in the effort. I want to help create good cartoon. Barbara, do you even know the food preferences and hobbies of the cartoon artists you handle?
But I bring them trendy sweets and stuff.
It's not about what's trendy. You need to bring what they actually like. Some people don't like sweets, you know.
Even though I lined up to buy it, I get told, I've mentioned before I don't like sweets, haven't I?
Let me guess, you bought that Mont Blanc the other day because you wanted it yourself. And just picked up something extra for the cartoon artist? Prioritizing yourself over your charge, what's that about?
That's fine, isn't it, just this once?
Not fine at all. Buying what you want and then just getting something extra as a courtesy. And then using that as an excuse to line up during work hours.
Well, not everyone is as passionate about their work as Sandra. I wish I had a cute girl like Barbara to handle.
Someone said, making me feel down. Donald. I didn't like their unserious attitude towards work. Yet, since they were the only batchmates I could speak openly with, we often went out for drinks. Barbara prefers older men. She says her boyfriend is almost 20 years her senior.
I lost my dad when I was little, so I guess I'm drawn to older men. They're kind and calm, and I don't get girls who date guys their own age. Hey. Saying that in front of us, a couple of the same age?
Barbara knows that Donald and I are dating. I can't imagine being with someone 20 years older. When I'm 50, he'll be 70. That's like a grandpa. We joked around like this, somewhere relieved that Barbara wouldn't become a love rival. One day, when I was meeting Donald for a date, Barbara called, saying she was feeling unwell and asked if I could pick up a manuscript in her place. I could have refused, but the cartoon artist Barbara was handling was actually someone I'd been personally supporting since their debut. Paul is a mid-30s male comic artist with talent but hasn't been blessed with a hit series. I had to cancel my date with Donald to pick up the manuscript. Ah? You must be Sandra, right? What happened to your usual person? I was happy that he remembered my name even though I had never handled his work before.
Barbara is unwell, so I came to pick up the manuscript instead.
Ah, she often seems to be in poor health, doesn't she? Is she frail? Is she okay? I had never heard that she was physically weak. It seems there are times she's refused requests using her poor health as an excuse. Hearing stories about messed up autograph session arrangements. Her bringing a fan letter that arrived 6 months ago, or bringing an apple pie for Paul despite his apple allergy made me frustrated. The other day, I asked for photos for reference, and she emailed me blurry photos found on the internet. If that were enough, I wouldn't have bothered asking. The teacher sighed. I apologized on behalf of her, and promised to give her a stern warning. Is my comic unpopular because it's not that great? He said something so sad.
I've been a fan since your debut work. I even buy your books and line them up on my bookshelf.
To which I confessed. Paul was delighted and said,
Really? Then I'll draw your favorite character for you.
and he carefully drew my favorite character in my notebook. I was so happy I forgot my anger at Barbara.
But she's so analog these days, wants analog materials, and it's weird she sends fan letters by mail.
When I firmly scolded her, she didn't reflect but insisted she was not to blame.
There are still many people who prefer analog. There are plenty of fans who handwrite letters filled with their feelings. Don't just do your job carelessly because you find it troublesome. What? Sandra, you're kinda scary. What we do is support comic artists to produce good work. Bringing them food they're allergic to or otherwise hindering them is actually harmful, not helpful. But I didn't know that. Can't be helped, right?
That was a lie. Paul had said he informed her clearly. Then Donald arrived and joined the conversation.
What's going on here? Some kind of fight? Donald. Sandra's being really harsh.
She whimpered to him with a voice pretending to cry, but without any tears.
Barbara, did you make a careless mistake again? It's not about being careless. I'm talking about an attitude towards work. We don't need an editor who troubles the comic artists. Hey! That's too much. Don't judge people by your own standards.
I never thought my fiancé would take her side. Looking back, I think this was when our relationship began to deteriorate. Our views on work and our priorities were different. I should have ended things quickly, but perhaps I still had feelings or thought it could be fixed, so I couldn't let go of Donald. Afterwards, Barbara was removed from handling Paul's work. Because Paul had asked the editor-in-chief if his editor could be changed, but out of misplaced consideration. They didn't tell Barbara the truth, so she believed I had snitched on her to the editor-in-chief.
How awful! Snitching to the editor-in-chief. I just warned you. I didn't snitch. Why am I being replaced then? That you're taking over proves it.
Indeed. Paul had requested the editor-in-chief for me to take over if possible. While this was very pleasing, it only fueled Barbara's belief that I was responsible for her being replaced. The thought of managing 4 comic artists seemed daunting, so after consulting with the editor-in-chief, we decided to let Barbara handle a hitmaker cartoon artist. This artist works in a production style, with plenty of staff to gather materials and handle events, and never misses a deadline. Basically, what an editor does is go to pick up manuscripts and bring refreshments. So I thought there wouldn't be any trouble with Barbara taking over. Barbara seemed pleased, saying,
Actually, it might have been a stroke of luck. Paul isn't very well known, and many of my friends don't even recognize his name. But from now on, everyone will know who I'm talking about.
This made me quite angry, even though she seemed to have forgotten her anger towards me.
I'm sorry if my request to the editor-in-chief caused trouble with your colleagues,
Paul said to me the first time I showed up at his workplace. I don't know how the word got out, but such news spreads quickly. No problem. I'm happy to be assigned. I'll work hard to make up for all the trouble Barbara caused. Please let me know if there's anything you need. When I say that,
thank you. I'm sorry to bother you so quickly, but could you please find me an assistant? I asked Barbara a long time ago.
I said, thinking it's unbelievable how little work she did. I arranged for someone who could draw in Paul's style and wouldn't disturb the workplace atmosphere too much. Since he is single and meals during work mostly consist of delivery, including for the assistants. I arranged for someone to prepare meals, and I also cooked when I visited. With no manager to handle day-to-day tasks, I took on as many of those duties as I could.
It's a huge help. You get perfect materials when I ask, and I've gotten much more time to draw.
I was pleased to be appreciated. Originally, Paul's work, while not flashy, had a unique worldview and humor, garnering many passionate fans. I'm one of them, but I think he must have struggled a lot. Wanting to spend more time on his art but being bogged down by miscellaneous duties and lacking assistance. Perhaps because he now had more time and mental space. The popularity of his ongoing series began to rise, and I was praised by the editor-in-chief. Then one day, Donald said he wanted to talk and asked me out to dinner. Maybe it was about marriage. Or perhaps a breakup. Either way, I felt it was time to clarify things. However, when I arrived at the restaurant we had arranged, Donald and Barbara were sitting together, side by side, not opposite each other. Feeling something was off, I sat down across from them.
Sandra, I'm pregnant,
Barbara said as soon as I took my seat.
Huh? It's Donald's child. What about the older guy you were dating? Ugh, we broke up a long time ago.
Barbara leaned into Donald, who was sitting beside her.
But I thought you weren't interested in guys your own age. That was true, but love doesn't need a reason. Huh?
Then Donald spoke.
I want to start a family with her.
So do it?
Huh?
If you want to be a family or whatever, go ahead. If that's all, I'm leaving.
As I got up to leave.
Wait! I feel bad about this.
Sorry, Sandra. They both said. Barbara's smug face at that moment made me incredibly angry.
It's fine. You two suit each other.
Donald then said with a downcast look.
I got tired of you acting superior just because you're good at your job.
I didn't intend to, but that's how he felt.
I wasn't looking down on you. It's just a difference in how we view work. That's why you two are a good match.
I left the restaurant with those words. I didn't feel sad. There was frustration, but it was more about losing to Barbara than about losing a fiancé I loved. I should have initiated the breakup sooner. Thinking of Barbara's triumphant face made me feel terrible. It seems she intends to continue working even after getting married. While our editorial department doesn't interfere in personal matters, almost everyone knew about my relationship with Donald. And suddenly, the couple had changed. Everyone loves a good scandal, and all sorts of speculation were flying around. I became famously known as the woman whose fiancé was stolen by her supposed best friend. I don't recall ever becoming best friends with Barbara, but she must have been spreading lies about it.
I knew he was my best friend's boyfriend, but I fell in love anyway.
I can't help it. She seemed to have cried, casting herself as the tragic heroine. But it wasn't just Barbara. Donald too. Sandra's treatment of Barbara was terrible.
Watching that made me drift away from her, and I felt I had to protect her.
Apparently, I was the bad guy, the so-called best friend. According to them, I harassed Barbara at work, took away the comic artist she was in charge of, and drove my fiancé away. Though I think those who know my work ethic didn't believe even half of it, I felt uncomfortable nonetheless. And I had to face those two every day.
Sandra, I'll give you an invitation to our wedding. You'll attend as a colleague, won't you?
When Barbara handed me the invitation, I decided to quit.
I won't be your colleague anymore, so I won't attend.
With that, I submitted my resignation letter to Charles, the editor-in-chief. Charles tried to persuade me to stay, suggesting we talk in a private room.
I love this job and I adore the comic artists I work with. But it's too painful to continue working here under these circumstances.
Then Charles said to me, "Honestly, it's more of a problem if you quit than if those two do. Would you reconsider?" Obviously, those two weren't highly regarded.
Thank you for your kind words, but I need some time to relax my mind and body.
I refused, and proceeded to inform the comic artists I was handling about my resignation, bringing them refreshments. They were all sorry to see me go, and some even said they wanted to work with me again if I switched to another publisher after their current series ended. Paul, thinking he was the reason for my resignation, apologized more than was necessary, making me feel guilty. I was also delighted to work with you, Paul. It's a real shame. I genuinely felt that way, wishing I could have helped more as his popularity was on the rise. Then, Paul said, if you haven't decided on your next job yet, would you consider, if you're okay with it, doing something like being my manager?
What?
Since you took over, it's been much easier to work, and I've gotten used to it. I think I can't manage without you. I can pay you the same amount you're earning now. But if you were earning a lot, maybe I can't afford it. His proposal was hesitant but heartfelt. And since he was a comic artist I greatly admired,
I'd be delighted. If you're okay with me, I'd love to help out.
And so, I became his manager. My salary turned out to be much less than Paul had feared, so there was no issue. Paul might seem laid back, but he never compromises on his cartoon. Working together, his love for cartoon and his own creations became even more apparent, and I grew to like him even more. The person who took over my role was a male colleague I had helped when I was new, surprised to learn I had become a manager. He mentioned understanding why Paul's work had been going so well lately. He said he wouldn't say anything, but eventually, my former company would find out I was working with Paul. I knew that, it's a small industry, but I didn't mind. My only concern was to continue creating great work with Paul. One day, he said excitedly,
"Hey, Sandra. Recently, the female characters in my cartoon have been gaining popularity. It's thanks to you. You gave me a lot of advice."
I had thought his male characters were fantastic, but his females lacked a bit of flair.
I really don't get women's psychology at all, so it's been a huge help. This character, acting cute on purpose. I thought she was annoying, but it's fun to draw her, and she's surprisingly popular. It might be thrilling in a cartoon, but having someone like that around in real life is awful. That character, Barbara, was the model for her, right?
I said, and Paul.
Really? I see her, huh?
Laughed like a child.
This girl character is based on Sandra, right? No, not at all. I'm not that cool. She's more like an ideal woman. Really? I've always thought this character resembles you and is wonderful. That's why I put a lot of effort into drawing her.
I was happy to know he saw me that way, and it felt almost like a confession.
Does that mean you think I'm wonderful?
Did I say something like that? Oh, I did. Sorry, that's creepy, isn't it? He apologized, looking downcast, which I found endearing.
Not at all. I love your cartoon, but I also admire and love everything about your work ethic and you.
Paul might look geeky, but to me, he was infinitely more wonderful than Donald ever was. Book sales were booming, and an anime adaptation had been decided. The media coverage and interviews increased. As a manager, these were happy problems to have. I had almost forgotten about Donald and Barbara, but I had business at the editorial office.
Right, those two got married.
Thinking this, I went to the editorial office and saw Barbara, noticeably pregnant.
Long time no see.
I greeted her cheerily, but she just glanced at me and walked away. After handing over some legal documents to the editor-in-chief and being invited, we moved to the cafe. It's been tough since you left. The editor-in-chief sighed. The hitmaker comic artist Barbara was handling got furious.
What? The one who's supposed to be stable no matter who handles him?
I was surprised. It turns out she upset him by asking, "Why don't you switch to digital drawing? Everyone's doing it these days." Regarding the few tasks she had, like picking up manuscripts and bringing refreshments. "I've apologized many times, and now I'm handling him. Barbara is sorting documents, but even that's not going well. But you can't fire someone just because they're incompetent at their job." She's all set to take maternity leave and parental leave. Charles sighed again. Donald's reputation isn't great either. I had him take over the veteran comic artists you were managing, but everyone compares him to you, saying he's not as considerate or fast. I keep getting complaints," he said, looking dejected. I felt sorry for him, but there was nothing I could do. I was relieved to hear that the newcomers were being handled by capable people. On my way out, I passed by the document room and saw the two of them talking, obviously not working. Not working after all. Donald noticed me.
"Long time no see. You're doing well, aren't you?"
and said with a defeated look.
"Yes, I am. With the anime and possibly a game adaptation, it's busy but fulfilling."
I smiled, and he clicked his tongue. I couldn't believe I was once engaged to such a man.
"Oh, by the way, I'm getting married to Paul. I'll be supporting him as a manager and a partner from now on." No way. He's been making a lot of money recently."
Barbara reacted to that, which was disappointing. Neither of them had a word of congratulations to offer. To top it off,
"It's unfair that you got to manage him after me,"
she complained nonsensically. So, I decided to tell a lie.
"Yeah. We're planning a grand wedding and honeymoon around the world. And we're thinking of buying a high-rise condominium for our new home."
I showed them a ring with a large gemstone. The ring was the only truth, the rest was made up on the spot. Though it wasn't impossible to make it happen. Seeing Barbara's deeply frustrated face was satisfying.
"Paul's just a geeky guy, right?"
Donald said, trying to save face. "He really is a petty man."
"He's a talented and wonderful person, worth dozens of you."
"That's the truth."
"Well then, I wish you both happiness,"
I said and walked away, hearing them argue behind me. Afterward, Barbara was apparently sued by the wife of the older man she used to date, demanding compensation. It seemed he wasn't single after all. Donald was saying the baby might not be his, but it's uncertain until the birth. They were already looked down upon for their lack of competence and motivation. And with this scandal becoming known, I wondered if even they would find it hard to stay at the company. But considering their shamelessness, it's hard to say. Either way, I can't imagine a bright and joyful future awaiting them.
A lavish wedding, a reception, a trip around the world, and a high-rise condominium, huh? Shall we make it all happen?
Paul said, laughing after hearing my story.
You're not one for showy public displays, right? The idea of traveling the world is tempting, but it would mean taking a long break from the series, and I don't want to disappoint the readers. I don't care where we live. All right. Then, once this series ends, let's take a super long vacation and travel the world. Let's. And we'll take lots of photos for reference. You really are the ideal editor. But from now on, it's okay to be a more selfish wife.
Paul says. Just imagining the world with cartoon makes me happy, but becoming any happier might just ruin me.
It's like a miracle. Ah, wait. It's dirty, let me clean it up for you. Huh?
As soon as I turned around at the incomprehensible words, I felt a cold shock on my face and crumbled to the ground. The stain on my moss green party dress slowly spread.
What's this? Water and flowers?
Looking up, my sister-in-law Isabella, adorned in a beautiful dress, was holding a vase that had been on the table. Water was dripping from the vase.
A dirty woman is clean now.
Isabella said this with a truly joyful look, sporting an ugly, mean smile. My name is Heather, 35 years old. I work as a housewife and in caregiving. My husband Kyle, who is the same age as me, was a high school classmate again and a high school reunion. Starting from friendship, his confession led us to dating and smoothly to marriage. Although we don't have children, we live a happy life. However, the relationship with my in-laws' house could not be said to be good. For some reason, Isabella, my sister-in-law who is 6 years younger than me, has been hostile towards me since the beginning of our marriage.
Could you not touch various things with hands that have changed drool-covered elders' diapers? It's unclean. Doing a job smeared in filth, earning less than half of what I make. Seems like the bill has come due for not studying properly.
I've been told things like this too many times since getting married. It's true that caregiving involves dealing with filth and is hard for the pay. But there is fulfillment, and there are joys in interacting with the people and their families using the facility. I still remember. Before we were married, at the facility I worked at, there was a very sweet and lovely grandmother with advanced dementia. It was tough to care for her, but she was very kind. Everyone called her Lovely Grandma, and she passed away from old age. Later, her family came to pick up her belongings and told me. When we first came here, honestly, our whole family was nearly at its limit. My grandmother, who had always been loving towards me, had forgotten even me, and needed care. But, being taken care of here gave us all breathing space, and we were able to cherish Mom like before. It's thanks to you all that we could love Grandma to the end. I'm glad we met you. Thank you. Hearing this from the grandson, his son, and wife, I ended up crying with them. At that time, I was struggling with whether caregiving was right for me and had thought about quitting. However, those words made all the hardship worth it and became the reason I continued in the job. Thanks to experiences like that, I now take pride in my work. Yet, being spoken to in such a manner by Isabella, who knows nothing about caregiving, was infuriating. Do you even realize how rude you're being? She works hard every day for her family. You, who don't even have a family, have no right to mock her. Fortunately, Kyle has always defended me whenever Isabella said something, but each time, she would counter with a displeased attitude.
Look, Kyle. It's only kids who think just trying hard is enough. And the thought of hands that have touched the filth of strangers elderly doing my cooking or whatever makes me sick. After all, caregiving is something you end up having to do when your parents get old, no matter how much you don't want to. To call something anyone can do a job. It's laughable.
Kyle and I were both appalled by her words. Leonard and Karen just looked on indifferently, as if it had nothing to do with them. According to Kyle, they truly believe that what Isabella, more accomplished than them with just a high school diploma, says is right. Without reprimand or reproach, they seemed unmoved no matter how much Kyle spoke up. Originally, Isabella was the long-awaited daughter born late in her parents' lives. Growing up spoiled due to her intelligence and beautiful features. By the time she graduated from a prestigious university and secured a job at a multinational corporation, she had become the top of the hierarchy in the in-laws' house. Both parents adopted an Isabella-first mentality. Now, Isabella's words and actions are always prioritized, with only her older brother, Kyle, daring to speak against her. However, her average brother, who graduated from a regular university and works at a small to medium enterprise, might as well be speaking to a wall for all the attention she pays him. It seems his words never reach her. The in-laws' house has never been a comfortable place for either Kyle or me, but we've decided to manage by only visiting a few times a year. Regardless of the situation at the in-laws' house, my husband and I have a great relationship. Just as I love Kyle, he treasures me above all else. To me, he is the perfect husband. Then one day, we received an unexpected piece of news. Isabella was getting married. And she wanted to wear her dress before turning 30, so the wedding was happening sooner rather than later. According to Leonard and Karen, the groom is a very decent young man who works for the city hall. Plus, his parents are civil servants, they own a house in the city, and he has an older brother who is already married. Indeed, a match without fault. No worries about layoffs, and owning a house in the city means wealth. I had to admire such flawlessness. Surprised by the sudden good news, Kyle and I decided to sincerely congratulate them. And before we knew it, the day of the ceremony arrived. The weather was clear. It was a refreshingly beautiful day. Having not attended a wedding in a while, and considering the venue was a luxury hotel, I put extra effort into my makeup and wore my moss green party dress, twirling in front of Kyle. "How do I look?"
Yeah. You look beautiful.
Smiling at Kyle's words, I couldn't help but beam. In the end, we had never met the fiancé. Today would be the first encounter. Although I had my thoughts about Isabella's fiancé, today was a once-in-a-lifetime celebration, and I wanted to wish the couple well. Then, Kyle's smartphone vibrated.
Hello? I understand. What, really? Got it, we're on our way.
Kyle hung up the phone abruptly and announced in a panic.
We're late. The family introduction is starting soon.
What? We looked at the invitation again. I recalled that for our wedding, we had sent a separate card asking relatives to come early. But no matter how many times I checked, there was no such card included. Isabella's smug smile flashed through my mind. By the time we hurriedly arrived at the hotel, the family meet and greet had already ended, and everyone was moving around freely. The hall, doubling as a guest room, was crowded with many other guests. We rushed over to Leonard and Karen, who looked displeased. Our apologies met with a stern glare from my father-in-law, Leonard.
What were you thinking, being late on such an important day?
We're sorry for being late. But we didn't receive any notice to come early. Look. Kyle showed the invitation to Leonard, who just shook his head.
There's no way she would make such a mistake. Maybe you lost it?
That's not. Kyle, at a loss for words, was quietly told by Karen. We'll have someone tell you later. Make sure to greet everyone before the party starts. It wouldn't be right for her. Perhaps not wanting to argue at such a joyous occasion. Kyle seemed to swallow his words, accepting Karen's. The mood between us was complex. Let's go freshen up in the bathroom while we can.
Yes, let's.
At Kyle's suggestion, I nodded. The hurry had disheveled our hair and clothes. Hoping for a mood change, we headed to the restroom, and on the way back, I caught sight of Isabella in her wedding dress.
Isabella.
Despite coming with congratulations in my heart, I couldn't participate in the party comfortably without addressing this. I called out to her impulsively. She looked at me with utter annoyance and said,
Hey, why did you come?
What? What does she mean? It's natural for me to come since I received an invitation. Confused by her inexplicable remark, I forgot what I wanted to ask. Watching me, she appraised me in the deserted hallway.
You're completely out of place.
I had no idea what she was talking about. I was dressed appropriately for the occasion, and while I might have been disheveled earlier, I had since tidied myself up. I didn't think I stood out as particularly out of place. Isabella continued.
I thought someone who cleans up elderly people's messes for a meager salary would be too embarrassed to show up. Or did you come because you rarely get to visit such places and couldn't resist the opportunity?
Irritated by Isabella's words, I held back, knowing that causing a scene would only trouble Kyle. I always wonder, why do you talk like that? I came because I was invited and wanted to offer my congratulations. Besides, there are elderly guests here, too. It's not very nice to speak like that.
Huh? You, of all people, think you can talk back to me?
Isabella frowned in displeasure at my attempt to respond calmly.
A below-average man for a husband, childless, and satisfied with a dirty job that pays peanuts. A loser lecturing me? Don't make me laugh.
It's you who's been insulting from the start. Anger bubbled up inside me. Just as I was about to yell back, Kyle called my name from behind. Startled, I stopped, and Isabella snickered.
Today is my big day. Try not to ruin it, okay?
Then, she left with a staff member. Left alone, Kyle hurried over, looking concerned. What happened? Is everything okay?
It's the same as always. I'm fine, really.
I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady, but it trembled. Kyle seemed to sense something and silently put his arm around me. Honestly, I couldn't care less about Isabella's wedding. But causing trouble now would affect many others, not just Isabella. I decided to endure it just for today. Swallowing everything I wanted to say, I hid behind Kyle and attended the wedding. Unable to feel happy, I just looked down, waiting for time to pass. Since I came all this way, I decided to at least enjoy the food. Just as we were about to move to the party venue after the ceremony, a staff member approached me. Isabella has requested to see you. She says she has something to tell you. Confused but summoned by today's main character, I informed Kyle and was led to the dressing room. Isabella, having changed her outfit, was switching her accessories.
Can you leave us alone?
Oh, yes. But the party is starting soon, so please don't take too long.
I know. Just leave us be.
Shouted at by Isabella, the staff member half walked, half ran out of the room.
What do you want now?
Muttering complaints, Isabella reapplied her lipstick and glared at me.
Do you know why I called you here? No clue. If I don't spell it out, you won't get it, huh? This is the problem with the uneducated. What do you want to say?
I asked, barely containing my irritation, wondering if she'd summoned me just to insult me.
If you don't get it, I'll be blunt. I'll tell everyone you left early, so can you just go now? What?
Shocked that Isabella would say such a thing, I was at a loss for words. Isabella continued with a displeased tone.
I didn't think you'd have the nerve to stay for the party, too. Really, you've got some nerve. It's people like Heather who don't know their place. Though Isabella's taunting was annoying, I indeed wanted to leave. If it was her suggestion, Leonard and Karen couldn't complain later. It would be a shame not to eat the food, but it's infinitely better than having to force a smile just to celebrate for appearance's sake. Understood. Deciding that staying any longer was pointless, I reached for my smartphone to inform Kyle, intending to leave promptly. Ah, wait. It's dirty, let me clean it up for you.
Huh? As soon as I turned at the nonsensical words, I felt a cold shock on my face and crumbled to the ground. What's this, water and flowers? Looking up, Isabella was holding a vase that had been on the table. Water dripped from the vase as Isabella smirked maliciously.
Now you're clean. The flowers are a bonus. I've graced your plain face with them. No need to thank me.
Isabella said this gleefully and reached for the intercom.
Oh, I'm sorry. My sister-in-law tripped and knocked over a vase. I have to go to the party, so could you take care of the rest?
After a brief exchange, Isabella tossed the vase in my direction. It rolled across the carpeted floor and stopped at my fingertips. I've endured snide remarks and insults before, but this direct aggression was a first, leaving me in shock.
Finally, I feel refreshed. Oh, and don't bother coming to the party venue. It would be a nuisance to have your presence known.
Now I understand. Isabella's words clicked. Normally, Kyle, Leonard, and Karen are around. She wouldn't dare cross certain lines with them present. Getting home in this state would be challenging, let alone attending the party. Isabella looked at my dismayed form and laughed triumphantly. Just as I was getting emotional, I heard someone running towards the door. The situation changed dramatically as the door swung open.
What have you done to her?
It wasn't a staff member but a man, seemingly the groom, breathing heavily and holding a bouquet of bright red roses.
Oh, nothing. She just fell and doused herself with the vase water,
Isabella said calmly, then her eyes lit up at the sight of the bouquet.
Wow, bright red roses. Beautiful. Is this a surprise?
This is.
I'm so happy. Did you remember I said I'd change into a red dress? Let's go to the party. She's fine. I've already called the staff, and she has nothing to do with us.
Nothing to do? The groom glanced at Isabella, who had looped her arm through his, then shrugged her off, and came over to me, pulling out a handkerchief. Please use this.
Thank you.
I accepted it, but glancing at the time, I saw the party was about to start.
Please, go ahead to the party.
I'll be fine. I disliked Isabella, but the groom and other guests who were looking forward to today weren't to blame. I didn't want to cause trouble for them because of me.
Let's go. Leave the sister-in-law behind. She's irrelevant.
Sister-in-law? You just said she was unrelated.
Ah.
Hearing my reluctance, Isabella slipped up, frozen with a "I've messed up" expression. She was ignored as the groom turned to smile at me warmly.
I wouldn't neglect someone who's done so much for us. Especially if she's the sister-in-law. What?
Our voices overlapped in confusion. Had I done something to be called a benefactor? Recalling the groom's face, I finally remembered.
Could it be? You're the family of the lovely grandma who used our facility. Yes. You were a great help to us then.
Indeed. He was the family member who had thanked me, calling it a blessing to have met me, the caregiver of his lovely grandma.
Never thought my fiancé's sister-in-law would be the caregiver who helped us so much. Back then, I only knew your surname, and she only mentioned she had a brother who was married. Wait, you know each other? And benefactor? Your grandmother passed away a while ago, right?
Isabella was confused, her face full of question marks.
Yes. Heather was the one who cared for our grandmother passionately until the end on behalf of our family.
Caught off guard by the unexpected connection, Isabella panicked. After a moment, Isabella turned a forced smile towards the groom.
So, that was it. Let's go to the party, everyone is waiting. What about Heather? Let the staff take care of her. Honestly, Heather can be so clumsy. She came all this way to wish us well, only to trip and drench herself.
It's astonishing how she can lie so brazenly. While I was drying off with a towel given by the staff, astounded by Isabella's demeanor, the groom said in disbelief, I didn't think you were that kind of person.
What?
Leaving a stunned Isabella behind, the groom picked up a decorative book from the room's windowsill. It turned out to be a case, and when he opened it, a handheld camera was inside.
What's that? You were recording secretly.
I'm sorry for recording without asking. You rushed the wedding, and I hadn't properly proposed, so I thought I'd surprise you with a proposal. Watching a speechless Isabella, the groom continued matter-of-factly. The plan was this. After you finished changing, I'd come to fetch you from the dressing room. Alone in the room, I'd propose again. If you accepted, I'd lift you in my arms, filming it all the way to the party venue. Then, play it live at the venue as a surprise. That was the plan.
Live?
Isabella turned pale all at once. I canceled streaming it to the venue because of the unexpected guest, but I saw everything. All of your actions. The groom glanced at me, then said with self-mockery. Never expected such a surprise, though. Isabella was trembling slightly. A mix of anger and panic evident on her face. You always found reasons not to let Heather or Kyle meet me, but I understand why today. For you, academic credentials and appearance are most important.
But you said it. That smart and beautiful people should be recognized.
You misunderstood. I said people who polish their skills, whether in studies or appearance, through effort should be appreciated. But that doesn't give anyone the right to look down on others. Rebuked sharply by the groom, Isabella was at a loss for words. The groom, leaving the rose bouquet on the floor, told her quietly, I'm not planning to cancel the party now, but we'll need to talk about what to do next. With those words, the groom left, and Isabella collapsed to her knees, stunned. Then, she glared at me fiercely.
This is the worst. You've ruined my wedding, you low-educated, plain woman. I'll sue you.
Realizing pretending to be nice was futile, she revealed her true nature and yelled at me, but I was surprisingly calm.
Suing me would only make you lose. But if you think that's best, go ahead. What did you say? Well, it's true, isn't it? You're the one who threw the vase water on me, and you're the one who lied. And all of it is recorded. It's your own fault the wedding is ruined.
Isabella, not expecting such a strong retort, gasped, then her expression changed.
Shut up. I hate you. Get out of my sight.
In a near frenzy, she picked up the rose bouquet and threw it at me before slamming the door shut. The sound of the bouquet scattering followed by Isabella's angry cries echoed. Soon, Kyle, Leonard, and Karen appeared, possibly called by the staff. Kyle immediately showed concern for my drenched state, while Leonard and Karen, confused, paid no attention to me but to their rampaging daughter in the dressing room. When asked to explain, the groom showed the video, leaving Leonard and Karen speechless and Kyle visibly angry. Her behavior is way over the line. We shouldn't have left you alone with her. Sorry for putting you through this.
It's okay, I gave it back to her. I feel better now.
Addressing the bewildered Leonard and Karen, I said,
I don't have a change of clothes, so I'll be leaving. Besides, she won't be calm with me around.
Leonard and Karen seemed relieved at my words. Is that so? Then I'll leave the rest to you. Please, go ahead without me.
The day belongs to her, after all. Please forgive her.
No matter what kind of daughter she is, for Leonard and Karen, their own daughter will always be dearer than their son's wife. That's probably just how it is. While I sighed in disbelief, Kyle embraced my shoulder and addressed them with a serious tone.
I can't remain silent any longer as her husband after what she's been through. I'm sorry, but from now on, we'll be keeping our distance. Take care.
Stunned by Kyle's firm declaration, they were left speechless. We left the venue hand in hand. The party started several minutes late, But Isabella, the bride, could not hide her irritation, shouting and yelling, and it was eventually called off. Reportedly, dismayed by her behavior, the groom sought a divorce. And less than a month after the ceremony, Isabella found herself single again. Isabella claims that her divorce is my fault, but it's clear to anyone that she's responsible for her own actions. I have no sympathy for her, seeing it as the result of her constant belittling of others. Now, estranged from the in-laws. Do you ever feel lonely being away from your real family? I asked, but Kyle simply said,
"What are you talking about? I have you, and besides, we're expecting to grow our family, aren't we?"
Kyle's hand caressed my swollen belly.
"Let's build a warm home for this child, too."
He smiled as he tenderly looked at me, and our unborn child was as warm as a sunny spot. I'm sure that with him, a happy future awaits.